Welcome one and all. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us for Let's Play, the Art and Design of Asian Games. This is the symposium for the Let's Play exhibition. My name is Lester Leo, very happy to be facilitating the event or the symposium here today. So lots to explore today. Now I want to go through some admin announcements before we officially begin, right? So for those of you that need the restroom later on, this just exit here, up the stairs and to the right side. Basically, that's the restrooms. Now also, I'd like to remind all guests to please kindly switch your mobile and other electronic devices to the silent mode. And third, in our sustainability push, of course, we do have a QR code for the event e-booklet, so you can find out more about our speakers today, you can find out more about what we're going to be speaking about today as well, so you can scan the conference e-booklet. Of course, this will help us in our sustainability goals as well. Great, so I'll just leave this here for a while for all of you to scan so you can follow the action of what's happening as we go through our symposium here this morning. Now, so ladies and gentlemen, welcome one and all. Now, Asian games. I'm sure all of us have played games growing up. So today we're going to be exploring a bit more about it. Let's start with this game here. That's why I'm wearing this shirt here. How many of you played this game? Mahjong. Oh, wow, very good. A lot of you. All right, so Mahjong started maybe about 250 years ago in China, and it moved across borders. Games move across borders as well, shaping cultures, shaping identities, and today there are many variants all around Asia, right? Whether you're in Singapore, whether you are in Korea, Japan, or whether you're in Hong Kong, the variation of Mahjong is really quite different. So very happy to be wearing this Mahjong shirt today to represent our Asian games. Now, how many of you play chess? Great. Oh, wow, that's a good percentage, right? So it started in India about 2,500 years ago as Chaturanga, right? It moved towards the west. Through Persia, it became known as chess. It moved east in China, known as Chinese chess or xiangqi, and of course, moved on to Japan, known as shogi, right? So basically, Asian games, as they move, they're shaped by local cultures, they're shaped by local identities, and that is really what we're here to explore today, right? Games, of course, serve as a powerful bridge between people, between ideas, and between generations as well. All right, so today, as part of our symposium today, we're here to really explore the visual culture, the development of games in Asia. So we are proud, especially, to have a distinguished panel speakers joining us today. And of course, we will have a fireside chat and also panel discussions where all of you can ask your questions on Asian games as well. Now, of course, today we do have the Weekend Festival as part of our Let's Play exhibition as well. As you're coming in, you saw a lot of fun activities going on. So I'll tell you more about that later on, just before we break for lunch. All right, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, happy to get our symposium started. It gives me great pleasure now to welcome Mr. Clement on. He's the director of ACM and the Priyanka Museum to officially open up our symposium. Let's give him a big hand, please.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Asian Civilization Museum. Thank you for spending your precious Saturday with us for our Let's Play Symposium. Today's symposium is held in conjunction with our special exhibition, Let's Play, the Art and Design of Asian Games, which runs until 7 June here at the museum. This exhibition explores the rich history of Asian games and the role that they have played in shaping culture, identity, and community. Some traveled widely, taking on new forms and meanings across borders. Others became tools for mental training or expressions of artistic ideas. From ancient boards and gaming pieces to contemporary designs, traditions, our symposium today will examine how games have traveled across cultures and how they remain part of living communities today. We are deeply grateful to our generous supporters who have made both these exhibitions, the publication, and today's symposium possible. I would like to thank our principal supporter, Dalio Philanthropies, the Fullerton Heritage Singapore, and the Fullerton Hotels and Resorts, who have shown remarkable commitment in advancing cultural understanding with the museum. We also extend our heartfelt thanks to our supporters, Ms. Ida Chow and Grand Park City Hall, for their invaluable contributions. I would also like to express my sincere appreciation to our distinguished speakers. We are honored to have Dr. Ulrich Schädler, who I have the good fortune of working with in, I believe it was in 2022, for an exhibition in Lisbon in the Museum Nacional de Arte Antigua, which I have the honor to participate in contributing a paper, who I believe Dr. Schädler is the lead curator and the scientific committee for the exhibition in Manar in Lisbon. And Crossing Game, to our understanding, was the second largest exhibition to look at games, Asian games, from a very Pan-Asian perspective. And of course, we have Dr. Colin Mackenzie, who again, one of the co-curators for the very famous seminal work of Asian Game, The Art of Contest, in the US, today with us to share with us his expertise. Mr. Olympia Urkan as well, and as well as Mr. Kevin Goh, Ms. Deborah, Freeman, Fahid, here in person today. We are equally grateful to our online presenters who have made time to connect with us across continent. Dr. Jacob Schmidt-Madsen from Germany, Dr. Anamika Pathak, and Ms. Priyanka Shah from India. Though they cannot be with us physically, their virtual presence enriches our program immensely. I must also acknowledge the co-curators of the exhibition, my co-curators of the exhibition, Ms. Noorashikin Zulkifli and Malvika Agarwal, for assembling today exceptional panels of speakers and for their dedicated work in creating this captivating exhibition. I also would like to extend my thanks to our education team, specifically Priscilla, Denise, and their team, again, for making sure that everyone is comfortable. There are refreshments coming up during your breaks, and all our speakers are also, all the logistics and hospitality. I hope that, you have a good time in Singapore. During your lunch break, if you have not visited the exhibition, or even if you have visited the exhibition, I encourage you to see the exhibition again, and if you have not, please experience it firsthand for yourself. So without much further ado, I hope you have an enriching and inspiring day with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Clement. Let's give Clement a big hand. Thank you, Clement. Thank you, Clement, for officially opening up our symposium here this morning. So as you heard, we got refreshments for all of you later on. So we got lunch, and also we got tea break for all of you. And also we have an extended duration for lunch as well, mainly for all of you if you have the opportunity to visit the Let's Play exhibition. So again, I'll give you more information about that later on as we move on towards the break. Because right now, it's time for our keynote presentation. Our keynote speaker is Dr. Ulrich Schädler. He will be discussing the fascinating connections between games across Europe and Asia. Now, I'd first like to invite our co-curator of Let's Play exhibition to introduce our keynote speaker. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me to welcome Malvika Agarwal. Let's give her a big hand, please.
Thank you. It is my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for this morning, Dr. Ulrich Schädler. Dr. Schädler is a German classical archaeologist and historian of games whose research spans ancient Greek architecture, Greek and Roman sculpture, and the rich history of board games from antiquity to the modern era. From 2002 to 2023, he served as director of the Swiss Museum of Games, and for over 3 decades has published widely on the history of games, establishing himself as a leading authority on ancient Greek, Roman, medieval games, as well as chess and backgammon. In 2018, Dr. Schädler was appointed titular professor at the University of Freiburg in Switzerland, and in 2022, he co-curated the exhibition Crossing Games, Journeys Between East and West at the Museo Nacional de Arte Antigua in Lisbon. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Ulrich Schädler to present his keynote address for this morning.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to address my dearest, warmest thanks to Director Clement On and the Asian Civilisations Museum, with all the team, the whole team of the museum, for this honorable invitation. and opportunity to talk to you this morning. We already there were the exhibition we organized in 2022 in Lisbon was already mentioned. It was not specifically about Asian games, but also it was mainly about how games moved between Asia and Europe, especially since contacts intensified after the Portuguese had discovered how to get to India in around 1500. And we exposed a number of games that traveled from one side of the continent to the other. Of course, when I speak about East and West, it's from a totally European perspective. You know, everything that is east of the Mediterranean Sea, for us, this is the East. We have the Near East, the Middle East, and the Far East. Here we are in the Far East, seen from Europe. Of course, when you look at a map from an Asian point of view, this is completely different. You know, India is in the west, and the United States and Americas are in the east. But I will keep to this to the standard definitions of east and west here in my talk. So for example, I give you some examples of these games that traveled between east and west. For example, the Japanese took over Portuguese playing cards. They call them caruta, which is from the Portuguese name carta for the playing cards. These are these typical Portuguese dragon cards, where the aces are designed as dragons. Then, of course, there is an incredible production in China, in India, for example, of games, especially chess, but also backgammon, for the European market, especially in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, which is quite remarkable. So these Oriental-style games became a kind of a craze, were in vogue in Europe for a long time, and there was a big production of very carefully made games. Then perhaps you would not know that also dominoes arrived in Europe from China in the 18th century and became very popular since then practically throughout the world. The first mention of the dominoes in Europe I found is from 1762 in France. Shortly later, around 1800, arrived tangram, also from China, and became immediately extremely popular in Europe, with European editions of tangram games. And then we have the so-called Chinese puzzles. They're called Chinese puzzles. They, in China, were produced these boxes with all these little puzzles inside. Tangram was mostly, very often part of it. It arrived around 1800 in Europe and became popular since then. You have some examples. It appears even in European paintings. You see that painting by Louis-Émile Pinel de Grandchamp of the 19th century, where this lady is doing one of these puzzles. And then, of course, also from China, sometimes from Japan, but mostly from China, there are these lacquer card boxes. You find some of them in the exhibition here also, that were produced especially for the British. And you see the playing cards that are a part of the decoration. These are mainly English playing cards. And Europeans appreciated these boxes for playing whist and Boston, together with these mother of pearl gaming counters they used to count the points in these games, that also were produced in China. and were very, very, very looked after. And then a little later comes, there's Pachisi or Chopper from India that the British introduced into Europe and became immediately one of the most popular board games all over Europe. Since then, and even today, even nowadays, the German version, as you see on the lower right, this version here, they sell 400,000 copies in Germany each and every year. This is more than any other modern game that comes out on the market. And the British, especially when the British invented Ludo, the simplified version of the Indian original Pachisi, it became really very, very popular. And this is a Vietnamese version, which has something to do with the French version. So there's a whole mix now of different influence from Asia to Europe and back again. And this is another example. These are these Japanese whist counters. These are little counters to count the points when you play cards that also have been produced in Japan and are very popular in Europe. And then, of course, Mahjong arrived after World War I in the United States on one hand and in Europe on the other. In Europe, especially as for Germany, we can say that it was German soldiers that they had their base in China, in Qingdao. They, after coming back from World War I, they suggested to produce the game to a famous German game producer, Richter, and they started to produce the game in Germany. This is the booklet of the Richter company, and this is a copy of the Richter Mahjongs. Well, these are some of these examples. Now I want to talk about especially two cases of traveling games, and with the first one I will jump back 2,000 years to antiquity, and with the second one I will bring you back home again in nearly present days. So the first one is backgammon. When I say backgammon, this is a general term for a whole family of games. Backgammon is today the most famous one, but there are other variants of the same game that are around since at least 2,000 years, even longer, maybe 4,000 years. When you see here an example of an illustration of Firdausi's Book of Kings. It's a Persian national epic where the story is told that the counselor of the King of Kings, Khosrow II in the 6th century, devised nard. This is the Persian name for the game. Nard means wood. And you see how the illustrators in the 16th century, they draw the backgammon board. This is a typical, the basic structure of the backgammon board. It consists of 2 rows of 12 squares divided in the middle by the bar into groups of 6. So this is the basic concept of a backgammon board. Rows of groups of 6 of 12 squares divided into 2 groups of 6. And now these, of course, the origin of backgammon, nowadays many people think that it comes from Persia, but it is just because of these legends, of the legendary, of Persian legends. We have no physical material proof of very early Persian nard boards or nard games, backgammon games. This is the Persian legends. And what I will do today is a little bit question this theory. So the general theory is that nard or backgammon was invented in Persia around 300 to 600, then traveled to the Roman Empire, to the west, and also to the east. On two different routes. One is the Silk Road, the overland Silk Route in the north, and the other one is the maritime Silk Route in the south. This is the general theory today. However, backgammon-type boards came up in the 3rd millennium BCE. This is really an astonishing discovery that was made about 25 years ago, when in southwestern Iran, these games were found in the region of Jiroft. And they, as you see, they have the same structure. They consist of rows of squares, 12 squares divided in the center into groups of 6. You see this here. For example, this is the one board in the Swiss Museum of Games. This is the one in Tehran. And the squares are formed by snakes. But you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and here 6 again. And the snakes, they meet in the middle to create these groups of 6. It's not just 12 squares, but 2 times 6. But we have 3 rows of these squares. We don't know how people in Jiroft played on these boards, and there is nothing left, no other trace of these boards for more than 2,000 years, until in ancient Rome, in Roman times. You know, this is the Jiroft board. This is the structure of this Jiroft board, and these are Roman boards from Ephesus in Turkey. And you have the same structure, 3 rows of twice 6 squares, divided in the middle by these symbols. We will come to this later. And this is very astonishing. So for more than 2,000 years, there's no trace of these 3-row boards, but then all of a sudden, they pop up in the Roman Empire. The Roman boards, they are very multifold in their designs. They have the squares can be, the houses can be squares, connected squares, single squares, circles, sometimes flowers or leaves, sometimes letters. There are all kinds of different designs of these boards. But they have these three rows. And this is very particular because nowhere else than in the Roman Empire we have these 3-row boards. Except for one example. This is highly interesting because the 3-row board appears in a wall painting from Sogdia in Tajikistan, near the Chinese border, and it is dated to the 8th century. These paintings are nowadays preserved in the State Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg, in Russia, and the scene is a scene from the Indian epic, the Mahabharata, where there is this famous dice game. This is also a subject in the exhibition, the dice game in the Mahabharata. And in the Mahabharata, there is this description of this famous dice game where Yudhishthira loses all his kingdom. And obviously, the people in Sogdia, which is a region of cultural interchange between India, China, and the West, the Roman Empire. In the 8th century, they thought that in the Mahabharata, the dice game that was played was this one. And it is clearly a Roman 3-row board. This is the latest example we have of these 3-row backgammon-type boards. It's very astonishing. So the Roman game arrived, knowledge of the Roman game must have arrived even far in the east, down to Tajikistan at the Chinese border. And it, as I will show to you, it is probably very likely that it even arrived in China. So this is what happened with these 3-row boards. And I will talk about the red line now. This is how the game obviously arrived in China. This is one of the early examples that are always quoted when we talk about Persian backgammon games. This is a bowl, a silver and gold bowl in the Sackler Gallery in Washington, where, among others, a gaming scene is shown. There are two people playing a backgammon on a backgammon type board, but with 2 rows of squares. However, these squares, or this board, shows several astonishing elements that are common to Roman boards. I'll show you. First thing is the connected squares. So the houses are designed as connected squares, as we have here. On the right side, you have an example from Turkey in Perge on the Agora. This is a typical Roman board, and you have these connected squares. And also here on the Sasanian ball, you have these connected squares, where not all the pieces, these squares cannot hold all the pieces. As in modern backgammon, you have these long elongated triangles because you can put until 15 pieces on one square. In these Roman boards, you don't have that. You put one stone on the square, and the others you put along on top of it, as it is shown on the Sasanian silver bowl. This is typical. This could be one of a Roman board just with 2 rows. And then there's another element, and this concerns the bar. This is called the bar. The bar is the part in the middle, and this is the dividing section. This is always in Roman boards. We have always different symbols that divide the fields into groups, and very often there are X's. There are some. I show you some of these Roman boards. They are all from Ephesus in Turkey, with these X's that divide the squares in the bar, and we have these X's here. As in this Sasanian silver bowl. So obviously, in my view, the board they use here to play as much as is influenced from Roman boards, if it is not even a Roman board. The Romans also came to know 2-row boards. At a certain point in time, they started to leave the 3rd row. They abandoned the 3rd row, and there are several 2-row boards even known in ancient Rome at about the same time when the Persians said that the game was invented in Persia. But we have also 2-row boards in the Roman Empire. And what is astonishing is that I will now come to Chinese Shuanglu boards. Shuanglu is a backgammon, Chinese backgammon. Shuanglu, as you know, the significance is double sixes, twice 6, which also corresponds more or less to the Roman name of the game. In Rome, the game was called Duodecim Scripta, or Ludus Duodecim Scriptorum, which means the game of 12 points. And 12 points you achieve when you roll 2 dice. Later on, the game was named Alea, which just means dice, because the Romans, at a certain point in time, they started to play with 3 dice to accelerate the game, and they played with 3 dice. So the name Duodecim Scripta would not work any longer. But in China and in Japan as well, Bansugoroku, the Sugoroku also means double sixes. So they refer, clearly they do not refer to the Persian name of the game, which means wood, but perhaps to the Roman name of the game. Now we have these northern Chinese Shuanglu boards, and they are also very particular because they also show some elements that we know from Roman boards. For example, the houses that are designed as flowers or circles, and the dividing symbols, these are half circles as dividing symbols. There's one wonderful northern Shuanglu board also in the exhibition upstairs. Now, this is an illustration of the Pu Shuang. This is the original dates to the 12th century. a Chinese text where there are descriptions of several backgammon type games. This is a copy of the 17th century where you see people playing Northern Shuanglu. It is called Northern Shuanglu in the text. And they use the same board. You know, they have little circles for the squares and half circles as dividing symbols. The Shuanglu also describes other versions, which are termed Arab Shuanglu, Southern Cantonese Shuanglu, so they clearly distinguish between different versions from the north and from the south. And the boards are different. The boards from the Southern Shuanglu are different from the northern ones. And these southern type boards, they can be found also in Japan. You have some of these copies in the exhibition where since the Middle Ages, the Japanese, they use these blocks with the elongated rectangles as squares. This is typical for the southern type of these backgammon boards. However, coming back to the northern ones, you see here, this is the illustration in the Shuanglu, the northern Shuanglu board, and some examples of Roman boards. And again, you find similarities. Similarities concern the circles that form the houses, as in the Shuanglu board, and the semicircles as dividing symbols. And even here, you have that semicircle on one wooden board that has been found in Denmark, in the north of Europe, but it is a Roman wooden backgammon type board, also with the circles and the semicircle, the double semicircle, as in this northern Shuanglu board. And then the houses that are designed as rosettes. You have several Roman boards where the houses are designed as leaves. Here, these are leaves, and again the semicircles as dividing symbols, and the leaves here and here, double petals. And the idea not to have elongated rectangles, but just to mark the positions where the pieces have to be placed by any other symbol. This is also common between the northern Shuanglu boards and the Roman boards. So it seems to me that what is also an astonishing element are these two rosettes here. They seem to indicate that there is still a knowledge of a third row, perhaps in the middle. However, these are features that are common to northern Shuanglu boards and Roman boards, and nowhere else we find these elements. So, this is what I wanted to talk to you, and this is the first example I wanted to give. So it seems to me that it is much more complicated as we thought, how these big backgammon games, how they traveled and they moved along from where they came, from where they went. But it seems to me that even the Roman boards, knowledge of the Roman boards arrived via the northern terrestrian Silk Route to China. Now, the second game I wanted to briefly to address is Go, Weiqi or Go. The game is known in China since at least the 3rd century BCE. Many people say that it is 1000, 2000 BCE, but the sources doesn't really prove that. We know that it was known around 300 BCE. So let's keep it like this. And it took a long time for Weiqi Go to arrive in Europe, at least as knowledge of the game to arrive in Europe. The first descriptions come from the Jesuits, from Matteo Ricci and his editor Nicolas Trigault. So Matteo Ricci was one. He lived for 20. Was a Jesuit who lived for 20 years in China, and he published after his death. There was published from his papers a report about a description of China and how his experiences he made in China, and he describes. This is the first description we have in a European book, European publication about Go, about Weiqi, and you see that is quite unprecise. You know, he says they play with about 200 counters on 300 cells, and he doesn't. So it is just wrong. This is just approximate. This is not very precise, and it doesn't give much more details of the rules. His description of the differences of xiangqi, of Chinese chess, to chess as it was played in Europe at the time is far more precise. But he obviously was not very interested in knowing much more about the game, even if he said that obviously the game is very popular among the Mandarins, and they play it for a long time, all day long, etc., etc. And there are even masters where they take lessons and so. So he was aware of the importance of the game in China, but he was not very much interested in it. Then there's another description of a mission into China, but we do not know if Johann Adam Schell, if he talked about Go or Weiqi, because he uses the term that is usually used for chess in European publications at the time. Then there is Arnold van Bergen, who had traveled to Japan, and he published in the 17th century, he published also a description of Japan, and he has this illustration of guards playing Go, he calls Pifang Go, and he has this illustration in the book, but no real description of the game. And then there is the German scholar Leibniz, who was aware of the game, of the existence of the game, and he was very interested in it, but he didn't have any better information. And even in the late 18th century, the Dutch Eberhard van Braam, in his description of China, he dedicated a whole chapter to Asian games, and what he says about Go is very informative, because he just said that the game is incredibly difficult, and it would not make any sense to give the precise rules in the book. But he says that he had a book. He had one of these books that you can see in the exhibition about the game. We have also an iconographic, very interesting iconographic elements. This is one of these Japanese nanban screens of the early 17th century. And there is one of these screens. Very often they have the arrival of Portuguese merchant ships as a subject. And interestingly, on the ship, on the black ship, the Portuguese ship, you see Portuguese mariners playing Go. And on the right side, there is a shop, and you have Go boards here. There are swords and musical instruments, and also Go boards that are sold in that shop. Does this mean, now the question is, does this mean that Portuguese mariners in the early 17th century, they played Go on their ships? I don't think so. I think the artist simply drew a board, a game board he knew, and that was easy to draw, and this is a Go board. Of course, in this shop, they would also have sold shogi boards, but shogi is much more difficult to draw with the pieces and the signs on the pieces. So the Go board is relatively simple to draw. So I doubt that Portuguese mariners, they played Go on their ships. The best description then came from Thomas Hyde. Thomas Hyde is an English scholar. He worked at the Bodleian Library in Oxford, and he published the first scientific book about the history of games in 1694. And in this book, we find the first really good description of Wei Qi, and this description he got from Shen Fuzhong. Shen Fuzhong was also termed in England the Chinese convert, because it was a Chinese young man who converted to the Christian religion and became a member of the order of the Jesuits. And he accompanied another Jesuit priest on a journey to Europe, where they arrived also in England. And there he met Thomas Hyde, and he helped Thomas Hyde to catalog Chinese books in the Bodleian Library. And according to Thomas Hyde, Shen Fuzhong explained to him how Wei Qi worked. And for example, we have these pages here in Thomas Hyde's book, where this is for the first time that anyone really described how Wei Qi worked. But Hyde had to rely on this primary source, as you want to have it, a Chinese young man who knew how the game was played, and he explained it to somebody. Now, this knowledge remained among scholars. The game Go did not become popular in Europe. It is not even today, it is not a really popular game. Of course, there are people who like it, who love it, who play it. There are clubs and associations and tournaments, competitions, but it is not really a popular game among the people. And but the first time it really Go arrived in Europe with good description, this is due to Oskar Korschelt. It's a very interesting thing. It is at the end of the 19th century. Oskar Korschelt was a German engineer who worked and lived in Japan for a while, and there he learned how to play Go. And then he published a series of articles where he really described the game with a lot in detail, even with commented games, with Go problems, with opening theory, with end games, and so on, in these 4 articles. And this is the first time that there is a really precise description of how Go was played. And but as you see, it took until the end of the 19th century. And before, Europeans were not really interested in to know how this game worked. The multiple chess champion Emanuel Lasker in the 1920s, who also wrote a chapter in his book about board games about Go, he said that Go had some elements which would make it difficult for Westerners to understand. And one can think now about what these elements would be. I have published an article about that 25 years ago, but we can discuss about that. But obviously, you know, sometimes games have structures or elements that prevent them from traveling elsewhere. You know, not all the games are able to travel and to transcend frontiers, cultural civilizations, languages, and religions. Some games travels and others don't. So that's it. That's what I wanted to tell you today. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Schädler, for the insightful presentation. And I'm also going to take a seat on stage. And I hope we have some questions to start off the session. But
Yep.
thank you so much, Dr. Schädler. I think it was really insightful, especially in the context of the exhibition, where we do talk so much about the transmission of games, games that originate in Asia, and the almost mysterious ways in which some games have become more popular around the world. At the start of your presentation, you went through this series of games, and I think especially for me personally, Pachisi, and the fact that it is still so popular in Europe under many, many names, is such a curious development where the original game is almost forgotten. And I think even in the case of backgammon and Go, which are both very popular still, I think I'll just want to ask you about the very last point that you made, about some games just don't travel, and Go is such a huge example of that. Why do you think, has that sort of not been the case for Go, where it has been the case for so many other games?
I had the impression that when we can observe that as far as chess is concerned in Europe, the development was that the medieval chess was very slow, and there are different attempts were made throughout the Middle Ages to accelerate the game. So there was a desire for more dynamics in the game. Until at the end of the 15th century in Spain, in Valencia, they came up with new rules, with a new move for the queen and the bishop, which made the game really, brought a new dynamics to the game. And immediately these new rules became popular throughout Europe, and still today we play according to these new rules. And compared to this, of course, Go is not dynamic at all. If you have this idea of dynamics, to move pieces along and far, to make long moves and not only one square. In medieval chess, pieces moved 1 or 2 squares at a time, except for the rook. So it was very slow. It took a long time to play. And this is why at a certain time they tried to accelerate the game. But compared to this, Go is really, it's a meditative, very calm, very concentrated, and it did not satisfy the mentality of Europeans, of Westerners. There are differences in the way to conceive the world in the this is one of the differences. Another point is that in Europe especially, we find variants. At the time, also chess was played in there were different variations of the game. Go was more or less the same all over centuries. So there are several elements, which are interesting to study because they teach us about different mentalities and different ways of thinking and different approaches, not only concerning games but also concerning the world, that are reflected in these games.
Thank you. And I'll now open up to the floor for questions. We have about 10 minutes. Please raise your hand if you'd have any questions for this presentation, and a mic will make its way to you. Right at the front here for Ms. Deborah Freeman.
Thank you, Dr. Schädler. It's a very, very interesting presentation. I wondered if you could say a little bit more particularly this huge lacuna there seems to be between the ancient game boards that have recently been found in Giroft. And you seem to be suggesting that the game had come to the Sogdians from Rome, but the Sasanians were also, backgammon was an important game for the Sasanian noblemen, along with chess. And I wonder if you could say a bit more how you think that game may have got to those kingdoms in Sasanian Iran and the Sogdian city-states.
This is thank you. This is a very interesting question. The point is that we have not many sources that are able to tell us something about it. The game was, as a matter of fact, became very popular, very important in the Persian civilization. Also, there are Persian manuscripts, Persian texts that describe also different variants of the game. There's not only one. Nard is not only one game, but as for backgammon in general, there are several variants that are also described in Persian literature, as in the Pushwang, also the several variants. Now, the wall painting in Sogdia is really interesting because this is obviously a Roman board that is painted here, and it is different. Even still in the 8th century, in the 8th century, they paint this old Roman board. This is really something intriguing. Of course, at that time, the two-row game was already popular, even in Rome. Since the 5th century, we have two-row boards in Rome. The game was played on 2 rows. In Rome, we have a good description of one particular position in the Roman literature by Agathias, who describes a position of the pieces on a board with 2 rows only. So even in Rome at that time, there were obviously 2-row boards. In Persia, Nard was always played only on 2 rows. In India, it seems that there was also a game like this. The Pushwang says that the northern game came from the west, came from India. But of course, in India also the game had been imported from farther west. We can see this especially from an Indian text from the 12th century, the Mana Solasa, where there are also 5 variants, backgammon variants described, but in quite a bizarre way. Several of these variants do not even work. And they were obviously adapted to play with 4-sided Indian long dice, and which makes the thing weird, really weird, because the game backgammon is clearly conceived for 6-sided cubic dice, but the 6-sided cubic dice were not in use in India, and still nowadays they are not really popular. People usually use 4-sided long dice, and in the Mana Solasa, the game is described in a way that it has been adapted, except for one variant, which is called Golaka Kridana, which means the game with 6-sided dice. So the game was imported also to India, and it must have come from the west, from Persia, obviously. But this is 12th century, and in between the game had already arrived for a long time. I showed the miniature Shuanglu board in the Henan Museum in China. It is big like this. It's 5 centimeters. It was found in a grave. It's a model. It's not a real board. It's a model. It's big like this, and it is 6th century. It's the end of the 6th century. And in the 7th century, the game had already been, there were problems in Japan with the game. You know, there is an edict that banned the game. So in the 6th century, it's in China. In the 7th century, it's in Japan. And the Mana Solasa is only 12th century. So it is really difficult. We do not really know what happened with the game in India at the time. And of course, concerning the gap between the Girov boards and the Roman ones 2,000 years later, it's completely, we cannot explain anything because we have no trace of it elsewhere in between. It must have been known in Greece, I think, but there's no trace, no material trace of the game in ancient Greece. I don't know if I've answered your question. I think your question cannot be answered practically. For the lack of sources.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions in the audience? Right at the back there.
Thank you so much for telling us about the game and all the things that you have learned about these games. I wanted to ask a question about what's your opinion, maybe not facts, but opinions about stuff that's happening outside of the games. For example, you mentioned the Silk Road. Are there games that change history about, especially when they go back and forth so many times? What does it imply about the people that were playing these games and what they were looking for?
About how games change? The question was about how games change?
Yeah, so that the people as well.
Well, yeah, thank you for this interesting question. As a matter of fact, games do not just exist by themselves. They only exist when there are enough people to play them. And people also abandon certain games over time. There were a lot of games that do not exist any longer simply because the people who played them abandoned them or do not exist anymore, or the games do not respond to changing expectations, to changing needs. We play games because we like to play because they have certain elements that we find interesting, and at a certain point, there are certain games that are not interesting any longer. So they die out very simply, or people change the rules or change elements and the games evolve. There are many games that evolve over time. As I already said, chess has changed the rules. Backgammon has changed its rules. Many card games, especially card games, they very often simply die out and are replaced by new games. It depends on what people want from a game. What the games should need to satisfy the demands of the players. Otherwise, they will not be played any longer. For example, Pachisi, the Indian game, had a huge success immediately in Europe because it had an element that was not present in other European games at the time. That was that you can throw off the pieces, the opponent's pieces of the board. And there are texts in Britain, early descriptions of the game who tell that they appreciate this. That it's very fun, great fun to do this. So this was a new element that was introduced, and this made it so interesting for the people because they hadn't there was no other game that had this element. So there are things like this. The elements are introduced that are unknown, new elements. That people find interesting, and so games change over time. They change, or they simply are abandoned. This is a constant process.
Yeah, I think to add to that as well, just something that we were talking about yesterday, that even when there is a rule book for a modern game like Monopoly, people will just make up their own rules and change the game as they play. So every player will just have a different version of the game as well. So I think on that note, I would like to thank Dr. Schädler for sharing such a wonderful insight and starting off this symposium day with a lot of questions and a lot of intriguing thoughts as well. And we have come to the end of our keynote session. Before breaking out for lunch, may I please invite everybody to a round of applause for Dr. Schädler's presentation.
I'm going to introduce our moderator and also the person to introduce our speakers here today. Now, she is Noorashikin Zulkifli. She's the Deputy Director and Principal Curator at ACM and Priyanka Museum, and she's also the co-curator of the Let's Play special exhibition as well. Now, she will be introducing our speakers, and likewise, we will be having a panel discussion after all their presentations as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me to welcome Nora on stage.
Thank you, Lester. So this first panel gets at the heart of why we decided to put on Let's Play. We wanted to move beyond seeing these games as, or rather the objects that we put on display, as dusty, silent artifacts, and instead understand them as part of vibrant, often noisy social histories and even living practices. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Colin Mackenzie. He served as curator of Chinese art at the Art Institute of Chicago until his retirement in 2022, following an illustrious career that included curatorial positions at the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art, Yale University Art Gallery, and the Asia Society. Dr. Mackenzie earned his PhD in Chinese art history and archaeology from the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London, and deepened his understanding of Chinese culture through extended study at Peking University in 1980 and 1985. His research encompasses the full spectrum of Chinese artistic expression, from ancient bronzes and jades to contemporary art. Particularly relevant to today's symposium it was mentioned already earlier, but in 2004, he co-curated the groundbreaking exhibition, Asian Games, The Art of Contest, at the Asia Society in New York, and co-edited its accompanying catalog. Today, he's going to help us to decode a game that was a staple of the Han Dynasty, the mysterious and competitive Liu Bo. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Colin Mackenzie.
Thank you, Nora, for that very kind introduction. And first of all, I'd like to congratulate the Asian Civilisations Museum on organizing this absolutely stunning exhibition on a subject that is very important in the history of world culture, and yet is too often neglected both in academia and in museums. And I hope, and I'm sure that this exhibition will address that failing. And it's a real honor to have been invited to participate in this symposium. Now, the title of my talk is mysterious. It mentions this phrase, 5 white, which comes from a passage in an ancient poem attributed to the poet Qu Yuan, who lived in the 4th century BCE in the ancient state of Chu, in what is now Hubei. And the poem, it's called The Summons of the Soul, and it describes a shamanistic ritual that was intended to call back the soul of a person who is recently deceased, or a person who is about to pass away. And the idea was to bring him back into the body by reminding him or her of all the wonderful pleasures that he or she had enjoyed during his or her lifetime, and also the dangers of roaming off into dangerous places. So amongst those pleasures that are described in the poem is one that relates to Liubor. And so this gives a pretty good indication that Liubor was popular in the 4th to 3rd century BCE. And you can see the quote on the screen. I don't need to read it all out, but it mentions throwing rods, ivory gaming pieces. It implies that there are two sides to the game, that pieces advance and they threaten each other, and then one piece can become a xiao and wins double, and then the player shouts out 5 white. If you, those of you, most of you who will have already visited the exhibition will have seen one of the first exhibits as you enter the exhibition, and it is a model of a game of Liubor. And you can see in the center there's this, sorry, I'm still trying to work out how to use this. Is this, that's, yeah, sorry, got the handle of it now, I think. There we are. You can see the board, you can see the pieces, and the two players. And I think you will notice immediately that they're very different. They're dressed the same, but their expressions are very different. The one on the left is, his mouth is wide open, his eyes are bulging, his hands are raised, and he's very excited. The one on the, it's almost as though he's either winning the game or maybe he's thrown a good move and maybe his piece is being promoted to the xiao, and maybe he's shouting out 5 white. And the one on the right, on the other hand, he's rather downcast, literally downcast. He's in a bit of a predicament. His hand is, one hand is stretched out, and it doesn't show that he's holding a piece, but perhaps he's about to pick up a piece and place it on the board. But he doesn't know where to place it. You know, he's really in deep trouble. And so that is the model of a game of Liubor as it was played during the Han Dynasty. Pardon me again. Oh dear. I'm afraid this presentation is my original one, not the one that I sent in later. Never mind. You can see here some earlier boards. The game of Liubor is mentioned, according to tradition, by Confucius. And Confucius is asked by a disciple about leisure and boredom and indeed about games. And Confucius replies, we have things such as bo and yi. And bo is normally interpreted to mean Liubor, and yi to be wei qi. Now, this quotation, there's some dispute as to whether it actually comes from the Analects of Confucius or slightly later. It may be a slightly later one. But at any rate, by the 4th century BCE, we know that the game existed physically. There are discoveries in a number of tombs of lacquered wooden boards, such as the ones that you see on the screen, particularly to begin with the top left, you see a rectangular board with various markings. You have what is conventionally called a V shape here, an L shape here, and then these bar-shaped markings on the other sides. And this seems to be quite an early version of it, because later versions are squarish. You can see here that you still have the 3 bar-shaped markings in the center. But by the Han Dynasty, it had been standardized with a square shape in the middle, and then extra markings. The bar-shaped markings have disappeared, and instead you get these T-shapes, which are attached to the central square. You also get markings in between the V-shaped and the point of the square, these strange markings here, and then sometimes a line that joins them. And these markings also seem to indicate positions on the board. And although most of these boards are lacquered wood, and they come from tombs in the state of Chu in Hubei, where the burial conditions are very waterlogged, and so actually lacquer survives very well. The game was clearly played in other parts of China as well, and these two stone boards come from the tomb of King Cao of Zhongshan around about 309 BCE. And you can see on the left, this one still retains the old layout of these three bars, but it does have the V shapes and the L shapes. And then it's beautifully decorated with dragons and snakes and monster faces. But these are decorative. They're not part of the game. And there's this other board, also from the same tomb. The three bars are replaced by a central square, and it has diagonals crossing it. We don't know what role they played. So the layout of the board is intriguing. In fact, it's unique. So that raises the question: where did these markings come from, and how did the game originate? And can we find any possible sources for the game? And I've searched high and low in the archaeological material, and the only thing I could come up with is this lacquered clothes chest from the tomb of a Marquis E of Zheng, who died in 433 BCE, a little bit earlier. But the painting, the design on this clothes chest is very interesting, because in the center you have the Big Dipper, a drawing of the Big Dipper, and then you have the 28 heavenly mansions enumerated round it. And then you have the the green dragon of the east on this side, and the white tiger of the west on that side. And so it seems to be a cosmological diagram. And then in the corners, you have these very strange interlocking L shapes, maybe even V shapes, that seem to have some significance. And it's been suggested that they mark off the edges of the universe, of the cosmos. And one particular scholar has suggested that in the Shang period at least, they conceived of the cosmos as a square with cut-out corners. And this particular scholar has talked about the shape of the turtle as representing the cosmos. And okay, it's not a square, but it sort of has cut-out corners there. Now, you may be totally unconvinced by this explanation, and I admit it's a bit of a stretch, but there's been no other explanation of the origin of the board that is more convincing. During the 4th century BC, we already see pieces of the gaming pieces preserved in tombs. You can see ivory and jade gaming pieces up here, and then some tokens as well, tallies. So clearly there was some way of accounting the stage of the game and winning tokens, winning tallies. And in the 3rd century BCE, you get the first semi-complete game. And you can see that the gaming board is there, and you can see the pieces, some are lost. But you also have the first examples of the rods, the throwing rods. And liubo means 6 rods. And actually, the bo is the same word as is used in modern Chinese for gambling. So, clearly there's a connection with gambling there already. And these throwing rods they seem to be split bamboo. In fact, they are split bamboo, one curved side and then one flat side. And this is hollowed out, but filled with some sort of material that includes gold dust in it. So that would have weighted it. So you would throw these rods, and they would come either one face up or one face down. Now, if you have 6 rods, how many possibilities are there? Well, it makes sense to say there's 6, but actually it's 7. It's always one more. It took me a long time to work that out. So I made my own set of Liubo rods up there. I mean, very primitive, sorry about that. So you can count, there's 7. I had to prove it to myself. And then in the modern or traditional but still played game of Korean of Yut Nori, they have 4 rods and you have 5 possibilities. So once one gets into the Han Dynasty, we actually have one semi-complete set of Liubo, and it comes from a tomb at Maongdae near Changsha in Hunan. It's a tomb of an aristocrat. And in the next slide, you can see the contents. You can see the board was there in the previous slide, and you can see the contents. You can see the 12 pieces here, 6 for each side, and then you've got another 20 pieces here, and we don't know what they were used for. Was it an alternative version of the game? We just don't know. You've got the tallies here, so clearly they were part of the game, that you either won or lost tallies, and you have a die here, which I'll look into in the next slide or so. And then, this is a better slide. You can see there was a knife up there for cutting more tallies. You have a blank compartment here, so maybe it's not complete, the game. And then this strange 2 compartments here that look a bit like drinking cups. And we'll come back to the idea of drinking cups in a moment. But now let's turn to the die. This is a rubbing of the die here, and you can see it's not like most dies. It actually has 18 sides to it, and 16 of those sides are numbered, 1 to 16, and then there are 2 characters, which are not numbers, and one of them is here, and then the other one is here. And this one, the character here, is Jiao, which is different from Xiao, but the pronunciation is somewhat similar. I wouldn't say they're exact homonyms. So some people have suggested that this character actually means that you're promoted to Xiao, to this special piece. And this character here, this is pretty clear. This is Wei, means to lose. And here you see it again here. In this die, you see the character Zhao again, all these numbers. And this die is beautifully inlaid. This is, I mean, the ultimate luxury die, made of bronze, inlaid with gold and silver, agate, turquoise. And here you have Zhao to win. And what is the worst way of losing in a game? It's not as though you get your head chopped off in Chinese games. What happens is you have to take a drink. This character here means wine comes to you, which is another way of saying take a drink. So was this top die used in Liubo? Well, it's not certain, because an example of this die with those same characters, including wine comes to you, was found in the tomb of the consort of the king of Zhongtan, the Han period. He was, I think, a younger brother of a Han emperor, and his wife was buried in a tomb, with him, basically. And this, oops, pardon me, the die here is accompanied by lots of coins. So this is actually separate from Liubo. And the coins have numbers on them, and then sometimes the character for wine as well. So this was a drinking game. We've talked about the use of the 18-sided die or dice. But probably the most common way of playing the game was with these 6 throwing sticks. And you can see them here. Oops, pardon me, I keep on pressing the wrong button. Laid out on a throwing mat. And then you can see 6 pieces lined up on either side of the board. The game hasn't started yet. And then there are 2 round things in the middle. And people have given various interpretations of what they may be. I think they may actually be representations of dice, because in one version of the game, you could actually play it with 2 dice. As Dr. Schädler has pointed out, there are almost all games have different versions of them. This is another model that shows the game in progress. And you can see the throwing rods have been thrown onto the mat. There are 3 pieces here and 3 pieces there. So the game has started because the other pieces have been already moved into the corners. But what is remarkable about, and indeed unique to this model, is that one piece is a different shape. It's larger. So could this be the xiao, the powerful piece? We don't know, but it's certainly indicative that it may be. I mentioned the association of liubo with drinking games. And here we have a liubo game going on in the lower part. And then here we have another game. And someone obviously has thrown a die here. And these are the wine cups. So clearly it's a game where if you lose, you drink. I suffered terribly when I was negotiating an exhibition in Gansu and Ningxia in the late 20th century. And I was the only male involved, the only Westerner. And so I was forced to play drinking games until I was drunk under the table and then expected to negotiate. That's probably why they got a good fee for the exhibition. I gave too much away. So how is it, you know, the game is mentioned so often, and we have these fragmentary and mysterious clues about the game. And one of them, which is a rhyme that's recorded in one text or another, which said to have been invented by this master liubo player, Xu Bochang. But it was so popular, apparently, that all the kids in the capital could recite this rhyme. And it's a palindrome, which means that the words or the characters are repeated in one direction and then in the reverse direction. I'm not going to read out the whole thing. You can read it there. But that doesn't really get us very far. So these maybe represent moves or places on the board where you would put your piece. But then there was this discovery, amazing discovery in a tomb of a divination board, a wooden board. As you can see, it looks exactly like a liubo board, right? But the characters on the chart itself are actually the earthly stems and the earthly branches and heavenly stems. I always get it muddled up. But basically, it's a calendar of 60 days. But our little rhyme, those characters, which they're 9 separate characters, occurs here. And the only one of those characters, actually, which is Fang, that one there, also occurs on the board. So we know that Fang is the center square, and Fang actually means square. So how far does this get us? Well, not an awful long way. Sorry about that. But there's a scholar called Lilian Zhang who's studied this in depth, and she suggests that perhaps you can plot these characters using the system that she's worked out onto this divination chart, and there she's plotted the characters here. And all these columns here are outcomes. This column here are the questions, like, you know, should I get married? Should I go traveling? Is my illness going to get better or going to get worse? And this board goes on a long way down. And then these are the answers here. And so depending on the day or the date, you get a different answer. Now, of course, the difference between divination, this diagram, and Liubo is Liubo uses throwing rods or dice, whereas this, it's all dependent on the day you choose. You know, you're saying, should you get married on a certain day? So does this really throw light on Liubo, or is the divination diagram adapting a Liubo game board? The answer's still out on that. That's a question that hasn't been answered yet. Now we go back to the question of the xiao. And one text says that if your piece becomes a xiao, and once again the question is it a separate piece or is it a piece that's just converted into a xiao? One particular reference says that then it's placed vertically on the board. And you can see in this model that he's holding it not horizontally, but vertically. So perhaps that piece is a xiao that's about to be placed on the board. Now, the game was absolutely, it was a craze throughout China in the late Warring States and Han periods. You know, there are many commentaries that criticize it, people wasting their time playing Liubo and then doing other things like, you know, cockfighting and all sorts of other games, all the things that Puritans hate people to do. But it was also played by immortals. So that was its saving grace, if you like. If immortals were playing it, then it's okay to play it. And here you see some immortals, you know, they sort of have wings there. They're right on a mountain peak, definitely not humans. And likewise here, and they're playing the game. And then it became to be illustrated on bronze mirrors. And bronze mirrors in ancient China, obviously they were used for cosmetic purposes to make sure you were looking good, but they had another role as well, which is to ward off evil. And indeed, in many cultures of the world, a mirror is regarded as revealing evil spirits. So when you suddenly get immortals or designs of immortals playing on a mirror, illustrated on a mirror, and then you get the Liubo board illustrated. You can see the design here, the T, the central square, the V, the T there, and then the L shape there. And these become very popular in Han Dynasty culture. So I think and some of these inscriptions which you see around the side mention Liubo. I'm not sure that this one does. But so clearly the mirrors had an apotropaic function, turning away evil, talismanic function, if you like. So this game, which was all the rage and, you know, widely criticized in ancient China, and particularly even in the 3rd century, there's a famous discourse, the discourse on salt and iron, which is really a discussion on economic policy. But that also mentions Liubo and how everyone wasted their time playing Liubo. They played during the day, they forgot to eat, then they played into the evening, they could get out lamps and play through the night. So in the 3rd century, it seemed, or the early 3rd century, it seemed as though Liubo had an eternal lifespan. But then it really fell out of favor. And by the 6th century, if not earlier, it had become extinct. And so the question that puzzles all people who study Liubo, and in a way it's already been answered by Dr. Schädler, why did this game that was so popular suddenly become extinct? And I think the answer, as Dr. Schädler suggested, is that it was a change in the cultural context. during the Han Dynasty, the quest for immortality was everywhere, and Taoism was very powerful. The idea you could try and discover the elixir of immortality by various means, all connected with Taoism. And then in the late Han Dynasty, Buddhism came in and became more and more popular. So the whole ethos changed from the search for immortality to the hope for salvation through Buddhism. And this was a pretty dramatic shift. And we see the same phenomenon of a game that is so popular in ancient Egypt, the game of Senet, that lasted for 2,000 years. It was, from about 2,200 BC or earlier, all the way through to the end of Pharaonic Egypt. But once Pharaonic Egypt fell to Rome, the game fell from favor. And the same sort of cultural and religious shift we see in ancient China. And by the 6th century, as I say, it was extinct and no one really knew the rules, but people still had a memory of it. And this poet, Wang Bao, he has these 4 lines that says, "Heaven and earth can last forever, immortals can live without end, but who can grasp the Liubo game?" That implies that he didn't know the rules any longer. We now have to go and visit. Really, I think that means to ask Master Jingong, who is a mythical figure or a sage, ask him about the rules. So that's as much as I know about Liubo. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Mackenzie. Okay, and then on to our next speaker, who's actually presenting online, joining us from Berlin, is Dr. Jacob Schmidt-Madsen. And he's from the Max Planck Institute for the History of Science, where he's a historian of board games. His research focuses on traditional Asian games and their intersection with ritual, divinatory, educative, and other playful yet serious practices. So his research focuses on how games like Ludo and Snakes and Ladders will take us on a journey from medieval India to modern homes. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jacob Schmidt-Madsen online. Okay, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. So take it away, Dr. Schmidt-Madsen.
Okay, thank you very much for having me here. So today I will be talking about 2 very well-known games. And those are games that are both being exhibited at your exhibition in their original form, so to speak. And those games you might recognize as the modern children's game of Ludo and Snakes and Ladders. And both of these games are race games that are played with dice, Ludo on the left on a cruciform board, and Snakes and Ladders on the right on a grid-based board. But they have more in common than just being race games played with dice. Because both of these games, they actually originated in India, where they were known respectively on the left as Chopper and on the right is Gyan Chopper. They were also adopted by British game manufacturers in the late 19th century and introduced to the West. And then finally, they were re-imported back into India, where they have now long since overtaken the original versions of the game that are only little known even in India today. So let's begin by talking about Chopper. So Chopper is a game which is played very similar in many ways to the modern children's game of Ludo, except that Chopper is a more complicated and intricate and in many ways interesting games. It can be played either with Cori shells, which are these binary dice that can land in one of 2 ways, And depending on how they land, they correspond to different numbers that your pawns can move on the board. And as you can see from this table, the numbers are quite large. It extends far beyond a 6-sided die. It goes from 2 to 30, and there are several ways of obtaining extra throws, meaning that the pawns will indeed truly race around the board when you play it. Now, another version of playing the game is with stick dice. These dice are 4-sided rectangular dice, and they can be marked in different ways on their sides. The two most common ways of marking them is 1, 3, 4, 6 or 1, 2, 4, 6 on the various faces of the die. And here you play with multiple dice, usually 2 or 3, which means that you can split the result of the dice between your pieces, again allowing for sort of more flexibility and strategy that you would normally have in the later Ludo game. Now, Chopper was known across South Asia, and it was played in numerous different variants. So there's no one standard set of rules for this game. And rules that you will normally encounter in Chopper is, for example, 2 pawns joining together in a single square to become a kind of super pawn that can eat other pawns without being eaten itself. Or it'll be a specific sequence in which you have to remove your pieces from the board in order to end the game. Or it might even be that some pieces will start moving backward on the board, capturing games in the opposite, or capturing other pieces in the opposite direction. Now, we don't know too much about the history of Chopper, the early history of Chopper, I should say, but we do know that it was adopted by the Mughals in the 16th century when they arrived and set up their empire in India. And here, in fact, they became very fond of it at the court. And as you can see here from this little quote, that history will, that sometimes they would play as many as 200 players. They had to finish 16 games, and it could last up to 3 months. And just as we heard in Liubo, if there were certain conditions under which you would have to drink a cup of wine. Here, if you lost your patience or got restless. Now, the Mughals encountered this game in India when they went there, and according to them, it was already a very well-known game when they arrived there. So again, this book from the late 16th century says that from times of old, the people of Hindustan have been fond of this game. Now, we don't exactly know how old this times of old actually is, because many of the references from before the Mughals, they're only quite recently before the Mughals. So here, for example, is a reference from 1540, which is about the time the Mughals arrive, or only just slightly after, which says that in every palace there is the game of Chopper. So here we clearly have a link between the game and the nobility in India. But when it became adopted by the nobility, we don't really know. Another reference here, slightly earlier, from around 1500, tells us that this game could be played in 2 different modes, either with 2 sides or with 4 sides. And Chopper is commonly played with 2 sides, but it can also be played with 4 sides. And from this little quote, we can see that playing it with the 4 sides actually meant that you were a cultured person. So again, this game was part of the upbringing of princes and something that you would need to know if you were to be a cultured person. But again, that's only around 1500. If we go slightly earlier, back into the 15th century itself, we do find references to Chopper used as a spiritual metaphor in certain religious settings. Again, it's really not possible to go much beyond these quotes, and often they're very difficult to date because they're in the form of poems that were original songs, and we don't really know when they were written down fully. Now, there is one smoking gun, so to speak, which is a reference from the 12th century, which is the earliest reference we have in India to a cruciform board. But this board, it looks slightly different than a chalkboard board. It has 6 by 6 squares in each arm. And though there is a description of the rules, they're not completely clear. So we can clearly recognize elements of Chopper in this game, but we cannot say for certain exactly how it was played. We can, however, say that it was played by the king and primarily for amorous ends. So he would play it with his wives in order sort of to tease out their affections and their jealousies by throwing the dice for them and awarding the dice to them to create this tension between them. And this sort of amorous mode of playing the game is something that would also later be associated with Chopper. So perhaps we are really looking at a predecessor to Chopper already here in the 12th century. Now, Chopper, the form of it, is often found in religious diagrams known as mandalas, which are really representations of the cosmos, again, somewhat similar to what Colin was just talking about with Liubo. And here, for example, we have a mystical grid diagram where we have the form of Chopper in it. So it is possible that at least the form of the game was suggested by existing forms from religious and mystical diagrams. And when we read text about the game, we actually often found that the arms of the game are referred to as petals. And this may refer back to, or at least is reminiscent of, the idea of the world as a lotus, with the stem in the center as the axis mundi, and the petals falling out to the different sides, containing the different continents of the world. So again, there is this cosmological symbolism attached to the game. And it goes even further. There is one Sanskrit text, which again, unfortunately, cannot be dated, which describes each arm of the board as representative of the cosmic principles of the universe. And I don't really have time to go into all the details of that right now. As you can see, it's quite a mouthful here from the quote. But to give you an overall idea, you can see here a single arm of the Chopper board divided into 24 spaces. And these 24 spaces, they then themselves match the 24 principles of the universe, according to this philosophy of both cosmogony and cosmography in Indian religious literature. So taking all these things together, what we see is that Chopper becomes a representation of the cosmos, where the central square, which is the empty square at the center of the board, that represents the ultimate cosmic consciousness, the unity that exists before the evolution of the world. And the evolution of the world itself then takes shape in these four cardinal directions represented manifest the universe. The pawns, they all begin in the empty center as part of the unity of the cosmic consciousness, and then the moment they move into the arms, they become separated from that unity and become individual souls that travel around the board in a counterclockwise direction. Because clockwise is the direction that the world evolves in, whereas counterclockwise is the direction in which it involves. So when the souls or the pawns are traveling around the board in the counterclockwise direction, they're moving back towards the origin. They're moving back to where they came from, which is exactly the aim of the game, to return to the center of the board and, metaphorically, to become united again with the cosmic consciousness. Now, this interpretation could be a later addition to the board. We don't really know the chicken from the egg here, again, as in the case of Liu Bo. But one thing we can say for certain is that it is a symbolism that is only implicit in the game. So it is like a layer that is added on top of the game that we have to see. It is not spelled out by the components themselves unless that you have this sort of metaphorical interpretive layer available to you. Now, the second game that I'll be talking about this morning is called Gyan Chopper, and that is the origins of the later modern children's game Snakes and Ladders. In this game, the cosmological symbolism is actually the same as in Chopper, but it is made explicit in the game. And Gyan Chopper itself literally means the chopper of knowledge. So by that fact alone, we can see that this is a game that came after Chopper. And maybe it was called Gyan Chopper not just because Chopper was a popular game and therefore it would invoke that game, but maybe also because the knowledge, so to speak, inherent in Chopper, that was known to the designer of this game, so that it was meant both to be a continuation of Chopper as a race game, but also as a continuation of Chopper as a cosmological metaphor, in this case, spelled out completely. Again, we don't know the exact origins of this game, but we do know that the earliest versions of the game, they come from the late 18th century. And it is possible that the game may have developed only in the late 17th or even early 18th century. And the reason that I'm saying this is that we really don't have any references to the game from before these boards. And also, the reference that we do have to games before this board, specifically the religious game, we just saw this metaphor before where Chopper was invoked as a game metaphorically representing spiritual liberation. And Snakes and Ladders or Gyan Chopper would be a much more sort of adequate and fitting metaphor for spiritual liberation, but it is never invoked by these mystics. And it would seem to me, at least, that if this game was known earlier, then that would actually be the game that they would have referred to rather than Chopper. So again, we don't have any clear evidence, but we certainly don't know this game from before the late 18th century in India. Now, to really understand this game, we have to think about it as what can be called an interpreted formal system. Now, in an interpreted formal system basically mean that every game is a formal system. It consists of positions, which is the board. It consists of tokens, which are the pieces on the board. And it consists of rules of token manipulation, which are the different moves that you can make with the board. There is nothing inherently meaningful about that, but we can attach meaning to the positions, to the tokens, to the rules of manipulation to make the game be meaningful to us. If we take chess as the example, we all know that the pieces in chess, they are representative of army units. The board is representative of a battlefield, and the movement of the pieces can then be said to be representative of military maneuvers. Now, the situation in Gyan Chopper is very similar, except of course the interpretation is different. So in Gyan Chopper, we have a series of sequential squares beginning at the bottom left in this image and ending at the top left. Now, we have the sequentially linked positions, then we have the pawns, each player has a single pawn, then we have the cowrie shells, which are these binary dice which propel the pawns forward along the track. Then we have rules, which means that when a pawn lands on a specific square, it'll either be promoted to a higher square or demoted to a lower square. And then there is a winning position, meaning the first pawn to end in the top square of the central row wins the game. And this, of course, is different from what you know from Snakes and Ladders, where the win position is the end of the track. But in this case, in Gyan Chopper, the win position was in the top central row. Now, what you're looking at now is the formal system. But if we want to interpret this formal system, all we have to do is to assign meaning to these different elements. And the moment we do that, we see that now the game actually becomes a game of souls that are traveling through various spiritual stages, propelled forward by the karmic fate, which is expressed by the roll of the die. And the connections up and down the board are representative of positive and negative karma, which are even propelling the souls forward on their spiritual journey or pulling them down. And the winning square at the very top is the place of spiritual liberation. And now suddenly we also understand why it's at the top central square, because here you can actually overshoot liberation. And if you overshoot liberation, that is, you miss the winning square, you have to catch a snake, go further down the board, and then continue circling around the board until you reach the winning square of liberation. And what that, of course, represents in an Indian context is the idea of the cycle of rebirth, where you roam around through different rebirth until finally you're liberated from this whole earthly existence that you're caught up in. Now, this is a very sort of general system of spirituality that you're looking at, but it's a system that can be said to be found in different religious knowledge systems throughout India as the core of them. But then it'll be skinned, so to speak, differently in the different religious communities. So here you see 4 boards, which belongs to 4 different religious communities. They're all playing the same formal system. They're all using the same underlying metaphor of souls traveling through the universe towards spiritual liberation, but the squares are inscribed with different religious terminology pertaining to the individual religious knowledge systems, meaning that even though you're playing the same game, you're moving around in different religious knowledge systems depending on the community to which you belong. And this is sort of very much the power of this game and of the way that we can interpret this formal game systems. So if we take one of these boards, that is the earliest board, the board that we know, which is a board which belongs to the religious Vaishnava community in India, we see here a board which is layered in different ways, and it's a board which represents different themes. It represents the themes of cosmos, the theme of man, and the theme of creation. And this board, which is from 1780 to say 1782, like it's a late 18th century board, we see here on the level of the universe, each row of the board represents a cosmological plane of existence. So going from the earth at the bottom to Vaikunth, or the heaven of Vishnu, at the very top. Other squares on the board, they're representative of man striving for spiritual liberation, where the different acts, such as violence, for example, will bring a person down to hell, whereas following religion will increase the person's intellect and insight, and ultimately being devoted to the Godhead will be a straight path leading up into Vaikunth, or Vishnu's heaven, or spiritual liberation. And the final overall theme represented on this board is the theme of creation. And here we see in the top left the universal qualities that is inherent in all creation according to this knowledge system. And then at the top right we have primordial matter, from which everything else that you see around you in the phenomenal existence is inherent, and from which it evolves. And interestingly, this means that the board actually evolves the universe from the top down. So the different principles of existence which we before saw mapped onto the arms of a chopper board, they're also mapped onto the squares of this board, but they're mapped in a manner so we begin at the top with the primordial matter and then the refinement of the matter down through the board. And if you see now at the bottom left of the board, we have birth. This is the square where the game begins, where the souls or the pawns are first entered into the game, and they move in the opposite direction. So just as we saw in Chopper, where you had to move in a counterclockwise direction to get back to the origin of existence, in Gyan Chopper, you move from the bottom to the top for the exact same reasons that you are moving in the opposite direction of evolution to get back to the origin and be reunited with the cosmic consciousness. So this is another great argument for how Gyan Chopper really takes something that was already inherent in Chopper thematically and just sort of spells it out through inscriptions on this game board and the mechanics of snakes and ladders and so on and so forth. Now, this gives us a static overview of the universe. But in order to really understand the power of this game, we have to see it from a ludic perspective. That is, we have to experience the game in order for us to really understand what this game does. So if you play the game, you first place your pawn representing your soul in the square of birth. Immediately, you will sort of forget about all the other squares on the board, and you'll just zoom in on that one square, thinking, now I have been born into the universe, and you will identify yourself with the one pawn. The pawn on the board is now you, a pure new soul being born into the universe, and the cowrie shells that you hold in your hand that you shake, they are representative of your karmic fate. So you might look at your cowrie shells and see how many squares forward can they take my soul and what is written in those squares. And that determines sort of the range of possibility of where this first throw of the die can lead you. And now let's say we're playing a game. First, we move ahead to the square of delusion. So you have been born into the world, but you have become deluded perhaps by all the different thing that the world around you promises and lures you into, and you have kind of lost your way. But as you move further along the board, you find that discipline that can take you out of the delusion and give you a direction in life. And luckily, that discipline has a ladder which takes you straight up to heaven, which is then representing here an elevated state, or perhaps even physically a rebirth as a semi-divine or divine being. But now that you have found that good path in life, perhaps you become a little too sure of yourself because the next square you land on is irreligion, and you forget the religious tenets that gave you this discipline and brought you forward in life. And a ladder, or a snake, then leads you back down into the delusion which you were just a few lifetimes ago. So, as you can see here, the game creates a spiritual narrative, a spiritual biography, you might even say, for yourself. And it creates patterns on the board, sometimes repeating pattern, as for example, ending up multiple times in the square of delusion, giving the player possibly something to think about in their own life. Is there something they should watch out for here? Because if we think of the game as reflective of that person's life, well, there are messages that can be taken from this board. Now, we don't know exactly why people would play this game, but it will probably be played for this whole range of possibilities, including entertainment and education and self-knowledge and divination. So this truly is the power of games when we see this game played out. The power to be a tool for modeling something outside the game itself. We can talk about games as modeling technologies, and they are able to use simple systems to model more complex systems. And this really is tells us something about why games have existed for these past, board games have existed for these past 4, 5, 6,000 years, because they are really, really powerful ancient modeling technologies that has been used throughout history to model the world around us. Now, moving in here to the final section of the talk, I don't really have time to go into the full reception history of these games in the West, but as we have already seen, they were adapted by the British, both of them in the late 19th century, Chopper as Ludo and Gyan Chopper as Snakes and Ladders. So we can say that both of these games were simplified by the British. Ludo was a mechanical simplification of Chopper, whereas Snakes and Ladders was a thematic simplification of Gyan Chopper. So in Chopper, we had this wide range of throws on the board that creates all these very dynamic situations, whereas in Ludo, you play with a single six-sided die. It's kind of a slow and incremental game that does not have the drama of Chopper, so it has been watered down thematically. In Snakes and Ladders, we have this sort of very rich thematic overlay on the game, which then completely disappears when the game becomes Snakes and Ladders in the West. So we can say that it is simplified thematically to become really a children's game. Now, the last thing I want to mention before I end up this talk is that in each of these simplifications of the game, there is a single change of game mechanic that radically changes the understanding of the game. And we have already touched upon them, but I'm going to repeat them here. Because in the case of Chopper, we saw that the counters, they move in a counterclockwise direction, whereas in Ludo, the pieces move in a clockwise direction. And by changing the direction of play, the British, probably unwittingly, actually destroyed the central metaphor of the game. Because the metaphor of the game is by moving in a counterclockwise direction, you're involving the universe so you can return to the original state in which you existed before the evolution of the universe. Whereas in Ludo, you are actually moving in the direction of evolution, meaning that you're just further evolving the universe, sort of. If we're speaking it sort of in modern terms, you're creating more chaos, more growth, instead of actually holding on to some kind of original core. In the case of Snakes and Ladders, what happened was that the winning squares we have already seen was moved from the top central square in Gyan Chopper to the very final square of the track in Snakes and Ladders. And whereas having the winning square in the top central square of Gyan Chopper was helping us to understand the game as a being a representation of the cycle of rebirth, and so invoking a cyclical idea of time, the moment that you take that winning square and move it to the end of the track, you actually get a representation of a linear understanding of time. So again, sort of a very Indian cyclical understanding of time is changed into a linear understanding of time simply by moving the winning square. So these two change of game mechanics, the reversal of direction of play in Ludo and the moving of the winning square in Snakes and Ladders, not only changed the game mechanically, but also radically changed the games thematically. And I want to end here and say thank you, everybody, for listening to my talk, and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Schmidt-Madsen. That was a really incredible presentation, really unpacking that so much could be in one or two games. Okay, I don't know about you, but that was an incredible journey through 3 different presentations. We've gone from, from BCE all the way up to just a couple of years ago, looking at many different games. And I think what really struck me is that games are really serious. In terms of how you engage with them, and whether I really liked what Dr. Schmidt-Madsen characterized games as modeling technologies, and how you can embed a very vast idea of the cosmos in games. And then at the same time, when you look at the history of chess, as in the social history of chess, it's also how these games can become some kind of social anchor in times when there's great adversity. So it's quite amazing to think how something that all of us think as just mere play can really, really multiply in terms of its function and benefit. So I'll just leave it as a comment for that. I understand we don't have very much time for the discussion, so I'm going to open it straight to the floor. If you have questions, please put your hand up, and a mic will be brought to you. Is anyone? Okay. From the second row, and then the lady in red in third row.
Question for Dr. Mackenzie. Leo Ball is not a very well-known game, right, in China? Because there's the Go chess and there's the Chinese chess, which are a lot more recent. Why were you interested in Leo Ball to start with?
The question is, how did I get interested in Leo Ball?
Why were you interested in the first place in this ancient game? It hasn't been played for a long time, isn't it?
Well, I think when I started studying Chinese many years ago in 1974, one of the professors of Chinese, D.C. Lau, he used to play Go, Weiqi, with certain students. And I was sort of interested to watch them play, but I never learned to play. In fact, I didn't learn to play Weiqi until I started to organize the exhibition on Asian games. But my studies, postgraduate studies, were in Chinese archaeology, and particularly in the southern state of Chu. So I had to look at all the excavation reports, the archaeological reports, and I began to come across the remains of these Liu Bo games. I showed you some slides of either the pieces or the models, and that got me interested. And then I thought, would it be possible to organize an exhibition on the history of Asian games? And after I'd thought about it for a while, I realized I couldn't do it by myself. I didn't really know enough about Asian games. So I got Irving Finkel from the British Museum, who is a real games expert, to co-curate it with me. And so from this germ of an idea about, or an interest in Liubo, I realized there was enough material for an exhibition on Asian games. And that exhibition, which is 22 years ago now, was a first attempt. And it's definitely been overtaken by the exhibition here, both in scope and depth and from every respect. So definitely in the 20 years since then, there's been a great advance. But basically my interest in Liubo was just suddenly reading these reports and realizing that there was such a thing as an ancient game that no longer exists. So that's my answer.
Thank you for very enlightening talks today. Now, a lot of these games seem to have come from India, like the Snakes and Ladders and chess. It was originally from India, I think. And why India? Any ideas?
I'll try to answer that. After I graduated history, I've got interested in chess history. So I got in touch with some of the most experienced chess historians out there. And as a masthead on their publications, like website newsletters, where they were asking for contributions and collaborations of all sorts, but I had this particular statement: do not ask me who invented chess and why. So I think that kind of applies to the geographic location as well. It's hard to tell. I'm sure there are some geo-cultural explanations for it, but I think a lot of it has to be guesswork, speculation, and probably decades of research on that particular topic.
Maybe we can ask Dr. Schmidt online to try to address or respond to this question.
Yes, I also don't really have a very good answer. I can say that India is indeed sort of a fountain of board games. It has a history of board games that go back 5,000 years to the Indus Valley civilization in modern northwestern India and Pakistan. And yeah, we have many games that come out of India, but I think it's also important to remember that games, they tend to travel. So it's we shouldn't always just think of games as something that, is tied to a single place. Games are these sort of abstract systems that travel very easily between cultures because they do not really require a language or a cultural understanding for them to be adopted by a different culture. So they are really sort of part of a shared global phenomena. And whether some games, they take on a particular form that becomes more popular in one culture than another is really difficult to know why that is. But I think we should try to shy away from sort of regionalizing or nationalizing these games and accept that they are shared cultural products that change when they travel, which also means that when a game travels to a different culture or community, they usually take on different meanings for that culture and community. Just as I showed with the Snakes and Ladders, where you have the same game that adopts different religious knowledge systems as they travel between communities.
Thank you. Maybe we have time for one or two more questions. Anyone from the audience at the back over there?
Hi, I'm Keng Ho Kui. I'm a public health physician by background. So my day job is as a health services researcher, and in the field of medicine, or I guess in the sense hard sciences, as you will, there are certain methodologies that are used. There's evidence-based medicine and how you decide whether something is effective or not. So there are certain methodologies about that. And I found very interesting today's talk, because now we're coming from the fields of history, anthropology. and all this wonderful research that they're doing about games and all that. I was just thinking in terms of, are there standards by which you decide, what is acceptable as evidence within your fields of doing research? So you cite a lot of, for example, written pieces of information and data. These people wrote in, you actually have the publications, right? They wrote these things down, but how much can you trust all that? So Mr. Erkan, for example, I think you mentioned H.J.R. Murray in there as a well-known author about chess and the history of board games for that matter. But I believe now already has been in a sense discredited because a lot of some of the things that he wrote were were later borne out by other sources not to be true or accurate. So in that sense, how much can you trust all these written sources? How does it work in your field is more or less my question for the panel.
I'll start on that. Sourcing is always critical. If history of games has to be treated as seriously as any other academic domain, sourcing is extremely important, and it has to be done watertight in all respects. That being said, my particular field of expertise, I should say, is biography, and I struggle a lot with, let's say, written statements or oral history interviews where our subjects tell one side of a story, and then you'll have to scrutinize it accordingly. You have to fact check it. You have to back it up with also contextual evidence and additional sources. In regard to Murray, I think just like medical science, historical research also advances. So he has written 100 years ago. So if there were some things in his writings that have been corrected or completed, I'm sure it's a very normal academic habit, really. I'm not sure if Murray is actually debunked. I will defer that to Professor Schädler, who should know obviously more about him. I think he's still considered to be one of the top 3 leading authorities on the history of chess. So I'm sure there will be some details that could be disputed or contradicted. But whenever I pick up that tome of history of chess, the remarkable scholarship that man has shown at that particular point in time is terrifying. I've seen a lot of well-trained historians in our lifetime who have computers and AI at their fingertips. They cannot produce that level of scholarship. So I'll end there on that note. Interesting question about sources. I think it's extremely important. It's true.
Well, once again, I'm struggling with the microphone. Thank you. Can you hear me, everyone? Yeah. Well, for the game of Leobor, I suspect that the response to my talk was a series of questions. There's so much we don't know about it, and where we sort of struggle with these fragmentary references to Leobor. So on the one hand, we have text. On the other hand, you have archaeology. And both those sources are fragmentary. They never tell the full picture. So it's very much a question of interpreting the evidence, just like with any academic study. You make some assumptions, you try and test those assumptions, and then other scholars come along and question them. And in fact, there are a number of reconstructions of Leobor rules. And I, many years ago, tried to reconstruct the rules, and we produced a game with some of my students, and it was a pretty lousy game. We never could have put it into production, although I might try one day in future to reproduce another game. But if you go online, you can find reconstructions of Leobor rules. But they tend to be rather speculative. So it's almost as though people feel the need to create games. That's something that has come through in this exhibition and in the talks. There are just certain people who just have to create games. And then there are other people like ourselves who then talk about games and want to try and analyze them and explain them and understand them. So it's an ongoing process, I would say.
How about? Okay, we take a last question.
Well, I just two points. One is to respond to Colin. I think you have been very kind for your comments on our exhibition. I think as a response, I would like to also thank you and Irving for, first of all, creating that exhibition 22 years ago. I mean, to us, to our team, that, the publication, the exhibition, which unfortunately we have not seen, but through the publication, the research that has been put into is really, to us, it's like the gold standard of all the games that you both explored. And very often of the time when we're doing the writing, we just, we're all in the rabbit hole in terms of, we're going down into the rabbit hole to say that, there is no way that we can surpass the publication and the exhibition. So we really held what you have done, the project, in the highest regard. And this is really a tribute or homage, a continuation to your work.
Well, thank you. You're too kind. I'm blushing.
Well, I mean, and of course, the continuation is with Dr. Schädler and in the exhibition in Lisbon as well, which I also find that that's the second most important exhibition when you look at games from a very cross-cultural point of view, which is the one regret I think what we had in the exhibition did not touch upon so much is about the Western side of the games, and that itself, it adds another level of gravitas to it. So what we did is, by our means, to explore in terms of the circulation and the cross-cultural relationship in Asia, but very quickly, as we're talking about these three exhibitions on games, I mean, my question is to Kevin. What was your reaction? It's a very casual question, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but what was your reaction when a museum like us came to your association, the Federation, and start to tell you about a possibility on an exhibition in Singapore about games? And we're going to feature chess quite heavily in it.
A complete surprise at the time, honestly. But I think everybody at the Federation was really excited that we could have this chance to share our story, not just about how the championship was held, but also what chess meant to us, not just from a sporting point of view, but also from a recreational aspect. And of course, I think chess today in Singapore, there are many social elements to it. That chess could be beneficial to many different groups, and yeah, I think yes, certainly raise awareness, and I think we just appreciate the opportunity and have the chance to showcase this game that we love.
Okay, I think we've. That's about all the time we have for the discussion. Will you join me in thanking all the speakers right here in Singapore as well as from Berlin for what has really been a very, very enriching and expansive panel.
Thank you very much, Nora. Can we invite our speakers to join us for a photograph? Dr. Jacob, you can just remain there as well to join in the photograph. So let's step forward. Let's take a photograph. What a wonderful panel, right? So we've talked about, let's step forward. Thank you. Talked about anything from Liu Bo. We've explored Ludo, Snakes and Ladders, and also we rounded off with chess, and more importantly, the history of chess in Singapore as well. All right, wonderful panel. Thank you very much to our speakers. We have Dr. Colin Mackenzie, Dr. Jacob Schmidt-Madsen. We got Olimpiu Erkan, together with Kevin Goh joining us for this panel. Thank you very much. Let's give them a big round of applause. Thank you. This is our final panel session for our symposium here today. I'd just like to give everybody a quick summary about this final panel. Now, it is on games, art, and design, and this will explore how games serve not only as entertainment, but as vehicles for artistic expression and cultural meaning. We'll be having 3 speakers, 2 of whom are joining us virtually. And once again, the same format will apply. We will first hear from our speakers, followed by a panel discussion. And pleased to once again welcome our co-curator, Malvika, to introduce our speakers. Let's give her a big hand, please.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for staying with us to the second session and the last session of the symposium. So our final panel, Games, Art and Design, explores how games serve not only as entertainment, but as vehicles for artistic expression and cultural meaning. It is a central theme of the exhibition upstairs. For those of you who visited would have noticed that we deeply look at how games have transcended as being objects of just utility or enjoyment to objects of great design ingenuity and artistic integrity in their own rights. So we're very fortunate to have with us panelists today who will be exploring this topic from different perspectives. Our very first speaker, it is my pleasure to introduce Ms. Deborah Freeman Fahid, who will examine the fascinating transformation of chess pieces during the early centuries of Islamic rule. Ms. Freeman Fahid is an independent art historian and curator based in London. She has previously worked at Christie's in London as a specialist in Islamic manuscripts and paintings from 1995 to 2004, and later joined the Al-Sabah collection, Dar al-Athar al-Islamiyya in Kuwait, as assistant curator and head of publications from 2007 to 2016. She is also the author of Chess and Other Game Pieces from Islamic Lands, Chess from the Islamic World, the Benaki Museum collection, and co-author of Learning, Piety and Poetry, Manuscripts from the Islamic World in the Nasr D. Khalili collection. Currently, Ms. Freeman Fahid is researching early Islamic rock crystal vessels and serves as a guest curator and consultant to the Benaki Museum, Athens, for a new display of the Museum of Islamic Art, which is scheduled to reopen in 2028. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Deborah Freeman Fahid.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here at the Asian Civilisations Museum, and I would like to thank the director, the curators, and the administrative staff for their kind invitation to speak at today's symposium and for making all the arrangements for us. The subject of my talk today is the possible origins of the distinctive shapes of the Islamic chess set that was used from the 8th century of the Common Era for several centuries. On the screen, you can see a beautiful partial chess set that is in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. These pieces are made of glazed fritware or stone paste, which is a form of ceramic ware used in Iran in the medieval period that could be molded into a variety of shapes and glazed with various strong colors, in this case turquoise and a kind of brown aubergine color. It dates to the latter part of the 11th or the 12th century and was probably made and found in Nishapur in eastern Iran. The shapes are those of the classic Islamic chess set in its mature form, which we'll discuss a little later. Just a little history. The game of chess was taken up by the Arab Muslims probably as early as the 7th century, following a period of intense contact with Iranian peoples during the Muslim invasions of Iran from 638 to 651. This continued well into the middle of the 8th century in Central Asia, when that region finally ceded to Muslim rule. Little is known of the playing of chess under the first Umayyad caliphs in Syria and Jordan between 661 and 750. But from the middle of the 8th century, it attracted intense interest at the Abbasid court in Baghdad. many Iranian intellectuals flocked to the new center of power in Iraq, some of them recent converts to the new religion of Islam. The first chess pieces used by the Arab Muslims were figurative, no doubt acquired from the Sasanian Persians, the subjects of their recent conquests. Writing in the early decades of the 10th century, the chess master at the Abbasid court, Abu Bakr ibn Yahya al-Suli, himself of Iranian and Turkic heritage, reported that, quote, "In the days of the Umayyads, the pawns looked like men, and the elephant and the horse also looked like what they were. I have seen many such chess sets, but they are no longer used." End of quote. It seems that the Persians had acquired knowledge of chess, a game of Indian origin, sometime in the 6th century of the Common Era. The pieces were based on the 4 elements of the ancient Indian army: the elephant corps, the knights, the horse-drawn chariots and foot soldiers, led by the Raja or Shah and his advisor or vizier. And these elements were to become what we call now the bishops, knights, rooks and pawns, led by the king and queen. So let's have a closer look at this set on screen. First to say that finding a complete set like this is a great rarity. Many of the major museums in the West and in the Middle East have 1 or 2 or a handful of Islamic chess pieces in their collections of Islamic art, but to get a complete set like this is extremely unusual. And the Metropolitan Museum did have the glazes tested, and it was of the period. To give you an idea of scale, the king piece is about 5 centimeters tall. And I'll just point out some of the shapes of these pieces. So this is, I'm going to use the modern chess terms, king and queen, rather than the Arabic terms, just to make life easier. So this is the king and queen pieces, and you can see they're a kind of double dome shape, molded probably into a dome, and then a part of the front cut away. So you've got this rounded dome at the front. And they're flanked by the bishops, which were originally the elephant core, this one. Again, the idea of the elephants preserved in these 2 forward-facing projections, suggestive of the tusks. And on either side of the bishops are, as you would expect, the knights. Again, it's a simple dome with a forward-facing triangular element to represent the horse's face, and then a kind of molded element on the top, suggestive of the back or the mane of the horse. The rook is a very distinctive shape in the Islamic chess set. It's usually of this blocky rectangular form with a deep V cut. And the pawns, as you would expect, have just become very simple domed pieces with fluted or faceted sides and a little knob on top. Now, as I mentioned, this set was probably found in Nishapur in eastern Iran. This had been a very important city during the medieval period. It was actually founded during the Sasanian period and then was continuously occupied up until it was devastated by the Mongols in 1221. It was important partly because it was a node on the Silk Route, which led from China to the Mediterranean via Iran. And in the years 1935 to 1940, there was a really remarkable archaeological expedition that took place, which was a joint Iranian-United States excavation. It's amazing to think of now. It was led by an archaeologist from the Met called C.K. Wilkinson. And at the time it took place, it was agreed that the finds would be split 50-50 between the Metropolitan Museum and the the Islamic Museum in Tehran. And in fact, there's still wonderful things in Tehran, particularly stuccoware and ceramics. Nishapur turned out to be a very important site for medieval Islamic ceramics, and a lot of vessels, ewers, dishes, all sorts of containers were found there, and also kilns. And in fact, this turquoise blue color was very typical of Nishapur ceramics, along with a very beautiful cobalt blue. But for me, the most exciting thing they found at Nishapur were these 12 ivory chess pieces. And they were published by Wilkinson in 1942 in the Metropolitan's Journal. He claims that they were found in a house of the early 9th century. So if this is correct, they could well be dating to the 8th century, to the second half of the 8th century maybe. There were no other significant finds of ivory at Nishapur, so it is possible that these had been imported from somewhere else rather than being made in that city. But I think what is most remarkable about them, given their early age, is that they are in fully developed abstract shapes, not dissimilar to the ceramic set that you saw just before. But potentially the difference in age between the two groups is some 300 years. And again, I'll just point out, for those who are not familiar with the Islamic chess set, we've got the king and queen pieces here. There's 3 of them. They're rather different looking at the bottom, but they've all got this double-domed shape. This one quite a bit taller and thinner than the others. And actually all 3 of them have got this sort of cusped element at the top, which is not present in the later pieces. But both types seem to occur at different times. Again, we've got here bishops representing an elephant with 2 upward-facing projections. I have another possible explanation for what this represents rather than the tusks. We'll come to that a little later. And only one knight, which is this piece of, was clearly quite an early shape, just a kind of block form with a little head projecting forwards. And then 4 of these rooks, again, this very distinctive rectangular shape with a deep V cut. This one is stained green. This is a unique example, actually, of a green rook. And the other 3 are of white ivory, this one, and this is another rook with a bit broken off. The 2 pawns are these simple cones with faceted cuts in them. Yes, so this is important to say also that this is the only group of chess pieces that has been found in an archaeological context that clearly belong together. This became a very important group for me in dating many other pieces. This was the other very important archaeological group for my research, very different, as you can see. This is a group of 7 objects that were found during excavations at a place called Afrasiab in 1977. Afrasiab is close to Samarkand in Uzbekistan, and it was an important Sogdian city-state. They were published early on by Professor Buryakov as likely chess pieces in 1980. And they were found in an early 7th century context, but may date to the later 6th century. Actually, they've been, for the first time, I believe, they were exhibited very recently in Paris and again in London in 2024, I think it was. So these these are the precursors, really, of the Islamic chess set, but there is, as you can see, a huge jump in design, because these are all figural. So I'll just quickly point these out to you, because they're so damaged, it's a little difficult to understand what some of them are. There is here no piece that I would identify as the king or the queen. But we have here what is probably a bishop. Oops, sorry. This is probably the bishop. You can see the body of the elephant here, and its head and trunk hanging down. And there's a little figure sitting on top, holding a shield. There are two pieces that are clearly knights. This one on the left. It's you can see a little figure mounted on a horse. Another one here, very crudely carved with sort of square heads, both the rider and the animal. Two pieces that I believe probably are rooks or chariots. It's a representation of the Indian war chariot. This one, perhaps easier to read, two horses drawing some sort of vehicle and a figure seated in the back. Another rump of a figure left here on the front. And then this rather curious one, which looks to be either from the opposing side or from a different chess set, with two, possibly three horses. There seem to be three heads at the front, but no vehicle of any sort. It's the human figure seems to be growing out of the back of the horses, rather like a centaur. A bit of a puzzle. And then here are two foot soldiers. Again, these are quite difficult to read, but they are in the form of a crouching foot soldier. He's resting on one knee. And all of the figures are armed, apart from this one in the middle. They all have these small round shields with a floral motif, and they're all holding some sort of weapon in the right hand. So again, this is the only group of figural chess pieces that have been discovered in an archaeological context. And this has allowed me to identify others. As we're really focusing on the Islamic chess set today, I'm not going to say much about these, other than that the majority of the pieces that I know of, which is only around 40, most of them have been found at sites either in Central Asia or in Afghanistan. They're quite small. They're typically between 3 and 5 centimeters high, and most of them are made from elephant ivory. So the question is, how did these, and why did these early chess pieces that were probably used by the Sogdians in Central Asia, by Sasanians in Iran and Afghanistan, and then initially by Muslim Arabs, how did they turn into the remarkable and very distinctive Islamic abstract chess set? To the best of my knowledge, no abstract Islamic chess pieces have been found in Iraq that might help us to understand what kind of pieces were used at the Abbasid court. However, a considerable number were found at Nishapur and at other places in Greater Khorasan, and particularly in present-day Afghanistan. The physical evidence of these pieces suggests that this considerable change started to take place in the second half of the 8th century at the Abbasid courts in Baghdad and at the client courts in Khorasan. The need for a change in design no doubt resulted from religious concerns about creating figural sculpture and the game's pagan origins. While a fruitful intellectual climate was nurtured under the Abbasid caliphs at Baghdad, it remained a center profoundly focused on the study of Islam. Chess was an area of concern, and there were religious scruples that it might lead to neglect of the 5 daily prayers and other religious obligations incumbent on the faithful. The move away from figuration in the applied arts was part of a general trend towards abstraction in the creation of Islamic art, and more practically, the relative ease of carving abstract chess pieces compared with the skill needed to make small sculptures of men and animals should not be discounted. So I'm going to outline some of the ways that the figural pieces were transformed into abstract Islamic shapes. Some of these, such as the bishop, knight, and pawn, seem fairly obvious. Others, particularly the king-queen pieces and the rook, are much less easy to discern. And I'm going to suggest some possible influences from the pre-Islamic past that was still a living part of material culture in the greater Khorasan area, displaying Buddhist, Hindu, and ancient Iranian influences. And amazingly, these seem to have lived on in the shapes of the Islamic chess set, although no doubt they have been forgotten. This small figurine, which is in the Al-Sabah collection in Kuwait, I've included to show really the characteristics of the Asian elephant. And of course, I realized that you're all familiar with the Asian elephant after I saw the lovely sculpture outside the arts club the other evening. But it's really just to point out the small ears and short tusks, and particularly the frontal lobes of the Asian elephant, which are very prominent. And this is an early Islamic rock crystal bishop, dating probably to the 8th or the 9th century. And here you can see these very prominent bumps on the top, which appear on many Islamic chess pieces. And I would suggest that this was more inspired by the frontal lobes of the animal than the tusks. This is a rather later bishop made of bone, dating to the 10th to the 11th century. Again, you can see the prominent bumps at the front, which make it very easy to identify. Here's another example, again made of ceramic, which again probably was found in Nishapur. And this, again, has the characteristic bumps. So this is the elephant. And this form, more or less, continued to be used up until the 15th century. In different forms, but very easy to recognize. Here we have another early knight, similar to the one made of ivory that I showed you earlier. There are two types of early knight, really. This is the simplest. This piece is made of alabaster. Interestingly, in the collection in Kuwait, we had two other pieces from this set, two of them made of white alabaster and this one of grey. So it shows that this is how the two sides were differentiated. Another form of the knight, which is becoming more of a dome shape with a beveled cut and a shield shape at the front. And another example made from rock crystal, from a very beautiful and important group of rock crystal chess pieces. I'm slightly whizzing through these, as I can see we haven't got a lot of time. And lastly, this one, which I think is very beautiful because it shows how the levels of abstraction were becoming greater and greater. This piece has got the sort of domed face of the Arabian horse, although this piece was found somewhere in Afghanistan. So, as I mentioned, amongst those Afrasiab figural chess pieces, there wasn't a king or queen piece that I would identify, but there are a few other examples. These are two that I have catalogued. This one's in the Al-Sabah collection. This is in a private collection. But as I think that the abstraction was of the animal involved in the piece, I would suggest that the Islamic king-queen's shape was taken from the double dome view of this piece seen in profile. So, so it would be something like this. The upper dome is a princely figure sitting in a howdah, as you see here, and then the lower dome would be the mahout and the elephant's face. Unfortunately, on this one, the elephant lost his head and trunk. Again, these are 4 of the pieces that were found at Nishapur that are in the Metropolitan Museum's collection. These are the 4 that they have on view. So you can see the distinctive forms of the bishop, rook, and 2 of the king or queen pieces. I'll just quickly show you some others. Again, 2 lovely rock crystal pieces in Kuwait. Another ceramic, cobalt glazed ceramic piece, probably from Nishapur. And another group of rock crystal. Now this is a very interesting group because I believe these are quite early, probably dating to the 8th or the early 9th century. And again, you can see here a rook, a knight, and a bishop, and a king or, unlikely, I think, queen piece, but it's got this double dome. But the interesting thing is that seen from the other side, this piece, the king piece, appears to be in the form of a Shiva lingam. And this is very surprising, to say the least, in an Islamic context. Historically, this group was assigned to Tulunid or Fatimid Egypt, which is middle of the 9th to the middle of the 12th century. And this remarkable form of this piece was never commented on until it reached the Al-Sabah collection. But we are now reattributing many Islamic rock crystals to workshops in southern Iraq and Khorasan. And if these pieces were made in that latter area, I think it is quite possible that the craftsman was inspired to use this shape because he had seen other examples of Shiva linga. At the time of this object's creation, parts of Afghanistan were ruled by the Turki Shahi dynasty, they observed both Buddhist and Hindu practices. And archaeologists in the early 20th century discovered several Hindu temples in the east of Afghanistan. And as late as 1942, there was a large white marble lingam, which was 75 centimeters high, still standing in one of the villages in Parvan province near Kabul. So this is at the same time that these pieces would have been made, and such a site would have been presumably much more likely to the craftsman. What it meant to him or the customer for this chess set, we can only speculate, but as chess was probably the preserve of elite males at court, there are a number of possible explanations. Very quickly, the rooks, just to show you some early examples. The one on the left is an ivory piece in a private collection. Again, very early. The one on the right, probably 11th or 12th century, made of ceramic. These are interesting. I don't know for sure these are chess pawns or possibly backgammon pieces, but I think it's interesting to point out their resemblance to Buddhist stupas. And I've seen several pieces of this form, so not uncommon. So lastly, the rook, which is the most complex piece as far as Islamic chess is concerned. Partly because we still don't fully understand the derivation of the name, nor its shape. And we have seen that the equivalent piece in the figural set was a war chariot drawn by 2 horses. Even by the time of the figural pieces, the chariot was an archaic concept. It had not been used as a weapon of war since the 4th century before the Common Era. And at that time, it was comprehensively outmaneuvered by Alexander's cavalry. Elephants continued to be used in battle in the Sasanian period, but nobody at the time that this object would have been made would have seen a war chariot for nearly 1,000 years. So you can see that this is another piece that's in the Al-Sabah collection, which I've dated tentatively to the 7th to 8th century. As you can see, the horses are clear. they're pulling a sort of cart with a backboard, and it's got these two little figures sitting. One is holding a shield in his left hand. Actually, I think they both hold shields. Go to the next slide. Yeah. No, only he is holding a shield, that's right. And the driver is seated at the front, doesn't seem to have any body. So very difficult initially. I couldn't really figure this out. But as I was searching for something that might be a model for this very distinctive Islamic rook, which is this block with the deep V, I came across this image. It's quite a famous thing, actually. It's a model of Surya in his chariot, being driven by Aruna, the little figure in the front. And you can see from this extraordinary pose of the horses going off on the diagonal like this. I wondered whether this could perhaps serve as a shape that turned into the Islamic rook. The other interesting thing I noticed is, well, because Aruna was apparently born with no body, the driver, this, funnily enough, seems to be repeated in these early figural pieces. If these pieces had all been made in Afghanistan, and I believe that they were, it's quite likely that the craftsman may have had sight of things like this. And in fact, interestingly, this image lives on into the 11th century in Iran. This is a bronze mirror. It's interesting to see the Chinese mirrors. The Eastern Iranians also made bronze mirrors. And this again shows a depiction of Surya in his chariot, and again these horses going off on the diagonal like this. The inscription is in Persian and concerns the Iranian New Year, which has just happened. So my research is ongoing in this area. Some of my speculations, of course, may turn out to be misplaced, but I hope this shows you that this so-called Islamic chess set was the product of a multicultural society. And I'll just leave you with one beautiful image of one of the great treasures of the Islamic collection at the Al-Sabah collection in Kuwait. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Deborah, for this overview, I think, of the fascinating origins of Islamic chess pieces and their possible evolution. And that brings us to the last presentation of the afternoon with Ms. Priyanka Shah, who is also joining us online. Priyanka is the founder of Shed, an independent design studio established in 2014 following her studies in architecture at the Parsons School of Design in New York. Based in India, the studio brings together architects and skilled makers to create objects defined by material experimentation and process. Shah's practice is shaped by her experiences in Surat, where a culture of technical ingenuity, the belief that anything can be made, continues to inform Shed's approach today. In her presentation, Priyanka will be talking about Shed's approach to making through the lens of play. And for those who have been to the exhibition, you would have noticed a carom board that's a contemporary design commission that has been made by Shed to extend the idea of innovation in game design through the exhibition as well. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Priyanka.
Thank you so much, Malvika. That was a very generous introduction, and I apologize I couldn't be there in person. I will try to make the best of this one online. The tone of my presentation will be about describing our practice as it unfolds today. And yeah, I shall start. Through all the visuals that you will see in the presentation are works from our studio itself, and I've tried to put special focus on games and the way we approach games and how we've approached games over the past decade or so, through which my practice has been evolving. And here goes. Okay. Shed. My journey in design began after studying architecture at Parsons, but what really stayed with me was construction practices expressed through materiality. I wanted to immerse into a more distinctive and instinctive hands on way of making. And I found myself drawn back to Surat. I moved back to India after New York, a city defined by industrial intensity and a deep belief in making. My father's diamond manufacturing unit became an early influence. In a place where 9 out of 10 diamonds in the world are cut and polished, I was surrounded by precision and evolving technologies and some of the most cutting edge technologies at an industrial level and being able to see them firsthand. But it was the mindset that stayed with me. A production manager at the factory once told me that any machinery part from anywhere in the world can be replicated in Varacha. Varacha is the same neighborhood where all of these diamond industries and factories exist. And that belief that anything can be made felt almost like play or pretend play. Around the same time, I was working on designing a playground for a school called Fountainhead School in Surat. Though it was unbuilt, it became a turning point for me and my practice. It shifted how I saw design as something that can invite movement, interaction, and curiosity. I began to understand play not as an addition, but as a way of designing itself. This instinct grew into a more deliberate inquiry. We began researching traditional Indian board games, their tactility and presence in everyday life, though they were getting more and more obsolete from thought, from memory, and from culture, from contemporary culture. And yet, we reinterpreted them through wooden inlay. We also exhibited them across India and in London. Um, Over time, these games and toys became a recurring format in our practice. What draws us to games is the state they create. When people play, they become more open, instinctive, and physically engaged with objects. We've done all kinds of gaming and play related objects like board games, tactile puzzles, spinning tops, carousels, and so on. About 3 years ago, our practice extended into stone. Marble inlay became a new playground, allowing us to translate precision and tactility into a different medium. Carom boards emerged from this process, balancing near frictionless performance with intricate inlay, uh, and have become some of our most recognized works. One of these brings me here today to the Asian Civilisations Museum. Today at Shed, play continues to shape how we think and make. Through games and beyond, we explore how materials can be experienced more intuitively. For us, play is not separate from design. It is one of the most fundamental ways of understanding it. This is our studio, and we're really kind of spread out, and we have design sections. We have also workshops in the same premises. And as you can see, there's quite a lot of open space. And so whatever space people find at the studio, they'll just claim it per project. This is our veranda. This is the first, on the left is the first kind of area that you see the minute you enter the studio. And if you see at the top of the wall, there's a band of these board games, and they're all wooden board games. These were some of the oldest ones that we had made, and have remained a recurring kind of motif in our practice, and one of the first things that you'll recognize when you walk into the studio as well. That's the team, and our team consists of designers, architects, interior designers, product designers, textile designers, as well as carpenters, polishers, artisans, people who work with different materials, and so on. Global curiosity. So today there's a growing curiosity for India globally. But I believe that the real excitement begins when curiosity turns inward, when we begin to see the wonder that's always been around us. And I really speak of over here the confidence with which we have started now approaching our own traditions and our own culture after these years and years, after these maybe generations of the colonial fever. And I think this lens is also helping us dig into authentic inspirations that really are derived from our own culture. And one such example is the board that is at the ACM currently, which is the Patola. This carom board is titled the Patola because it speaks of the weaving lineage or the weaving traditions of Gujarat, which is also where I'm from. And this is a significant collection of textiles at the ACM as well. And the Patola is characterized by these pixelated kind of motifs that appear on fabric through weaving techniques, but it is very special because the yarn itself, before getting woven, is perfectly calculated and dyed, which is called ikat dyeing. And the patola is one of the most resplendent kind of expressions of ikat that exists in all of the world and through all of time. And it did mark the fabrics or the textiles of the elites. It even made its way into like the Javanese courts and some breaches which I saw at the ACM itself. So this is a carom board, and it is made from marbles, sandstones, and some semi-precious stones, all from the subcontinent. We've brought in the pixelated kind of way of making these motifs, and you'll see them appearing in different details across the board. Each part is painstakingly kind of inlaid within one like central framework, and the entire framework is also formed in three colors: the yellow, the green, and the white. And every single part is, hand carved and first cut and then hand adjusted for them to fit into like the base, just like puzzle pieces. And then several layers of finishing and stuff and pigment filling as well to bring out these different shades and colors, which all come together to form this motif. In my head, the process is not too different from an actual patola sari, and the painstaking nature of those. I think they take about 6 to 8 months per sari. These are some more of zoomed in details. And we've gotten really ambitious with how small we could get with the pixel sizes here. And these are all the animals which are caught mid-action. The board is kind of imagined to be on the Rani Ki Vav in Patan, which is this beautiful monument, which is the geographic region of where the Patola originated from. And the Patola also has a lot of animals, icons within them, and that is also why it's like considered to be so resplendent and expressive, and we kind of took from similar traditions here as well. I will speak about now pattern systems. To make patterns was to learn discipline through repetition. Each line, dot, and curve, like the gaulis drawn in Jain derasars, the kolams at doorsteps, or the yantras traced in temples, was a record of time and attention, a way of aligning hand, mind, and spirit. These were never ornamental. They were offerings drawn to bring order to the invisible. Their symmetry carried meaning, geometry made legible from a distance, holding power and clarity in equal measure. For centuries, these forms have carried symbolic value, passed from one hand to the next with little need for change. Understanding a pattern often came later. While making, one was only tracing a path again and again. Maybe a pattern reveals itself only in hindsight when repetition turns familiar and what once felt mechanical begins to make sense. I speak here of the pattern systems that have kind of governed different types of board games, the geometries that have governed different types of board games. And upon first look, it's really as simple as patterns, rectilinear patterns and stuff, which are guiding a game. And one example of how we keep imagining and reinterpreting patterns, especially in carom boards, is what I would like to illustrate here. in the next few slides. And it really will be about our journey through these carom boards and how we've kind of evolved our language through them. This is the first one that we did with marble inlay, the most stripped down, basic, maybe simple one. This was made for a cafe in Bombay. And they really wanted to bring in this like interactive, playful, they wanted to bring these interactive, playful elements in the space so that people could be more, people could stay there more and be more in the present moment, perhaps. And then we started getting more and more ambitious. Like while you'll see here that most of the shapes are rectilinear and straight and geometric, these ones start getting really curvaceous, and we're starting to see little corners and stuff here, which we had to deal with in stone. This is the next one. This is a carom board which was made for Bhutanese monument, and just motifs from Bhutan. This was also a carom board in which we'd inlaid metal into stone as well. So the roofs that you see in the monuments on all four sides, they're all actually copper strips. And on the right bottom corner, you'll also see these 3 prayer wheels, which when you turn them, they indicate the black and white playing of a game. This one's, of course, the patola, which was the next one we did after these two. Then we did this one, which is the courtyard of a South Indian home. And it's kind of like this play of the elevation on the side and a top view looking down through the roof and into the courtyard, which is usually in the center of the house. And then it's also marked with like these vessels in the center where there are either lilies or lotuses and stuff growing. The next one is this more free-flowing farmhouse and farm animals inspired carom board. And this one really, in this one, I think we were really trying to break geometries and we were trying to lose the pattern, but still have it as a guideline for just playing. But really, while you're engaging with the board, it's not the pattern that you see, but it's all the individual motifs that you see, and hence create like a free-flowing landscape of sorts, and yet enable gameplay. And this is like an in-between shot of how the marbles were all fixed together. And these were all the different colors of marbles and all the different pieces that went into the main base. And then there were more layers of details that were added in this to bring it to that final board. And this is another very ambitious board that we did, which was the undersea life. And our client wanted the picturization of Antiparos in Greece. And this one really is ambitious in terms of how small we could get with the different colors of stones and different sizes of motifs. And also how close together we could place different motifs so that the stone could still withstand really tiny crevices and stuff on the board. This is one that literally has been finished at the studio like last week, and you guys are the first one to see it. This one is about Ranthambore in India, which is where tiger safaris, and basically it's a national park with tigers. And here you'll see on the bottom and the top, like the monuments, which are, the top is the monument and the fort, which is also, by the way, visited by the tigers in this national park today. And at the bottom, there are these tents, which is the jungle lodges. And then on the left, there's the village, and on the right, there's the village, and on the left, there's like basically the safari cars going through the jungles. Some of the coming pictures are the ones that are in the works. This is inspired from Suzani embroideries and is going to be made now at the studio. This is the way we think about patterns, and this is the way we kind of sketch each piece out before actually converting it into stone and marble with like real color as much as possible. This is a relatively ambitious board that we are going to start attempting, and this is on the city of Bombay. And here again, you will see we're trying to break pattern while also retaining the geometries of carom, and still bringing in like these chaotic elements and this like city appearing mid-action. This is one that is still being worked on, and this is a hill station called Kunur in India. And some of these like colonial buildings and the atmosphere of Kunur is really what we're trying to bring out. And there's tea plantations and contoured landscapes there. Next, I will speak about living craft. Making, like play, is not an end state, but a living one that unfolds through practice or riyaz. It exists in small, continuous acts, stacking, mending, polishing, placing, sliding. These gestures carry forward a lineage of making where knowledge is not fixed, but passed through doing. Games sit naturally within this continuum. They are at first objects, crafted surfaces, pieces, materials brought together, but they only come alive through interaction. In play, the hand returns to them again and again, learning weight, friction, balance, and rhythm. When craft and play remain visible, which is pratyaksh, we stay aware of the effort and material intelligence embedded in them. When they become invisible, which is paroksh, they risk turning into passive objects stripped of connection. Living with these games, we begin to understand not just how they are made, but how to use these objects, maintain them, and bring them to life. And that is where longevity is established. I believe very strongly in creating games and objects which are not stored away in drawers and containers and hidden away in your homes and in your spaces, but really things that you can live with and things that can come out in the open and things that you can interact with, because that is really the way that will ensure these objects don't get lost in oblivion. And really, I think some of our studio practice is geared towards taking these board games and games out to different contexts and to, bring out interaction with different types of people everywhere, wherever we can take them. And so this one is a little trip that we had taken through Kutch years ago. And we'd taken this box full of games that we had created and just went to a village and opened it out in between all the kids in that village. And it was just an instant kind of appeal to the kids, and they just came circled around this board and box, and they were just so curious, and there were no inhibitions. They were okay to just pick anything up and start figuring out what to do with it. And I thought that was a very, very significant moment for me in ways of learning how universal games can be for people to come together. And this is another outing that we've had consistently as a studio, where we participate in creating these installations at a music festival. And this music festival is held in Rajasthan at an old palace. And the whole palace kind of becomes different stages for different artists to perform in. And we've always been invited to put up traditional Indian board games in a live manner, where people can actually come and play during the day or during, in between like the shows. And it's been a really great hit for us, and we've reinvented ourselves through these temporary installations year after year. And I think we've been there now about 7 times over the past 10 years, excluding the COVID years. So yeah, this was one of our first forays where we created this temporary structure out of these beads. We call them the bead thread system, which were actually table legs, but we just kind of replicated them enough so that it formed this tent. And it created a really beautiful enclosure within which all the counters for all the games were stored, and outside were all the games in the form of these coffee tables. And the idea was one could pick, whatever counters one wanted and take them to the game and start playing them with their friends or whoever they wanted to. And that was really how, so it felt like a little marketplace kind of thing where you pick up what you want and then start engaging with the pieces outside of it. The next version of this tent actually became an interesting commission for us recently, where we made it as a play tent, added like foam core on all the sides, and also covered it up with khadi cotton, and it became this really sweet permanent structure this time as a tent for kids to play in and read in and do different activities. So just showing you guys how offshoots of different ideas have played out over time for us in different ways. The next is our foray into spinning tops. This is actually a very famous Indian actress called Ratna Pathak Shah, who was engaging with our spinning tops at this function, at this show in Bombay years and years ago. And it was really fun because she instantly connected with these, saying, "Hey, I've played with these back in my childhood, and I want to give this a go." And she was just very amused with the fact that we were making spinning tops today as a very young practice, because the usual thought process is that the spinning tops have kind of disappeared from daily life and daily play and younger kids, and usually they don't know what to do with them anymore. And these were some of the different ones that we've done, and we've gotten very technical with them. We've made them from very sophisticated methods of like lathe turning and precision, like brass turning and aluminium machining and stuff, and created these different spinning tops. And they all have different times of spin, where some of them are very long spins and some of them are violent spins and some of them are levitating sort of in the way that they spin. So it's really wondrous, I would say. This top, when light falls on the face, it's almost like a disco ball, and it starts emitting light all around its ambience. So again, one more little playful moment within a toy like this. This is a Zen box where we're starting to dabble into ideas related to pretend play. And this is really just a collection of different materials and objects from our studio over the years, and just putting them in sand and just seeing what kind of landscapes emerge. And this one led us to these doll houses that we created. This is a little, very, very tiny dollhouse with these miniature furnitures, and really taking this thought of pretend play forward. And all of the pieces of furniture were actually miniatures of the furniture that we design at the studio. And this is another little more ambitious kind of, we call it a dollhouse, but it's slightly different, where all the walls, the levels, all of these parts can actually disassemble, and they can come back again in different variations of layouts. So it's basically a conceptual model of traditional Indian architecture, perhaps, which is modular in nature, and it can keep going in whatever format as long as you stick to the grid. Living objects. Objects, especially those we play with, can be seen as living, animated through touch and evolving through use. A board game only comes alive in interaction through repeated gestures of placing, moving, and counting. Take Palanguli from India, part of the Mancala family of sewing games. Rooted in agricultural rhythms, seeds are moved from pit to pit, a simple act through which counting and strategy are learned. Here, objects become carriers of memory. As materials and forms evolve, even through different geographies, the essence of the game continues. Mancala variations have sprouted up in almost every part of the world through history, known with different names such as Ovare in Africa, congkak in the Southeast Asian cultures, and Kala in North America. To make these objects is to extend that lineage forward, allowing them to continue living, teaching, and transforming over time. One of the most significant examples that I have come across in my research of board games is the Mancala games that have come through all geographical regions, I think, of the planet. And they are said to have originated on farmlands, and these are all the different forms and the variations with which they are played in different parts of the world. So the concept is the same, but the strategies start changing a little bit because of the counting of the bowls. And it's really interesting to me how, even though seemingly these regions were not really connected to each other, for sure these games have actually carried through different trade routes and such, and they've kind of, taken a life of their own in different parts of the world. Then I will talk about material diversity. Material diversity for us begins with curiosity and not control. We don't approach materials with apprehension or the need to make them obey. We assume we know nothing and let each encounter reveal its own logic. Every material carries its temperament: wood that swells and shrinks, brass that softens with heat, glass that bends light, stone that resists until it yields. We learn from how craft lineages have worked through these same problems, empathize with their solutions. At Shed, we try to absorb this diversity into our own language, letting materials and processes inform one another. The goal is not to perfect them, but to stay in conversation with them, to let the intelligence of matter shape the intelligence of making. And this is our earliest collection of the same coffee tables that you guys saw ahead, where we were playing with wood and inlaying of wood. And this is another show that we did where we also added these hand embroidered games on Gaji silk. And this was also to speak about the traditions and the textile traditions. And basically, I was dabbling with every single resource that I could and every single material that I had access to. And my mother has this fantastic team of embroidery artisans, and they were the ones who had created these. This is some of the earliest chessboards that we've done, where the idea was to do very, very stripped down versions of the chessmen. And again, just utilizing whatever resources we had access to, whatever techniques we had access to, and making the best of them. And at that point, I did not know how to sculpt wood or carve wood. So here we go. This is a backgammon, and again, just starting to appreciate different types of species of Indian woods. You see rosewood, you see teak wood, you see savan wood, and I think this was an expression of just the different colors of materials that were available to me. This is a chessboard that we'd done where we'd combined brass, rosewood, and the chessmen here were in fact made from marquetry, and different striations of wood laid out in different directions gave different patterns of marquetry in the chessmen that you see slightly at the bottom. And this was yet another play of forms of the chessboards and how to make them fit within one line and make them into this like compact folding board. This was an expression in marble, lime plaster pigmented with indigo, and the facades of this box were actually made from sandstone, and they were evoking Rajasthani architecture. And the chessmen also had motifs of different patterns that we see on architecture. And the top faces of of each of the pieces were actually painted with fresco techniques. And we got the characters of the chessmen, saying the king or the queen or the bishop or the rook and stuff, just hand painted on top of lime plaster on each of the chessmen. And this is a material that we actually researched at the studio and created at the studio, learning from older practices, called paper clay. And this is paper pulp, multani mitti, which is fuller's earth, and slaked lime. The blue parts are pigmented with indigo and the white is natural paper clay. And again, this is a wet to dry technique of taking this pulp mixture and making it, molding it in shapes and letting it dry. And it becomes this it's a technique related to paper mache. And there are these really beautiful kind of primitive forms that we're able to make with this material. These are some more of the board games that we've done with the same paper clay, but scratching the surface and also the red terracotta paint that you see in the middle to paint the patterns on. This is another marble inlay snakes and ladders that we've done, and getting very ambitious with this, with the craftsmanship, where we've tried to make it as concise and consolidated as a board. And this is a Scrabble with each square in this is actually a different piece of stone, and they're all kind of combined together in marquetry techniques. This is just under works, and we're trying to do inlay of glass in marble, and also creating these counters made from glass as well as marble and jasper stone and stuff. But again, these are glimpses from the studio that have not made it out in the world yet. This is another game that we did where this is a custom Monopoly for, in fact, a real estate company in Bombay, and they wanted all of their properties to kind of form the premise of the game. And so the title deed cards are all made in different stones, and all the hotels and the apartments are in fact skyscrapers. So as you start playing the game, you're basically building the skyline of the city, and that's the idea. And we really were very open about exploring different materials and how they would compose a game like this. So there was metal, and there was brass and copper and stone and marquetry on the wood, and also little bits of wooden sculptures. And this is one special project that we did again at the same music festival, but one of the later years, where we had done these live board game installations where each pedestal is formed out of brick and rendered in cow dung. And each surface is a game that's formed from metal structure and then filled in with sand, like little loose pebbles, and different colors of sand, in fact, even marble powder. And this is it. It got really animated when people gathered around it. And this was, in fact, on one of the final days of the festival. This was a treasure hunt that was unfolding through the festival. And at the game, the winner of the game was the winner of the whole competition. This was the way it looked in the courtyard, where all of our pedestals were kind of, made in situ, and each game was a pattern on top of them. And all the patterns were made from found things and very, very readily available material from around, nothing exotic. These are, in fact, cores of a palm tree that at our own studio, there was a fallen coconut tree, in fact, and the branch, we kind of chopped it down and we created these cylinders from it, which became the pattern of a marble solitaire game. This was the same palankuri, but we took little teakwood bowls, and each bowl became a container for the counters. This is our checkerboard version, where there was sand overall, and then the ones that were white squares were filled up with wooden pieces. This is yet another game, Nine Pence Morris or Nav Kakri. And this is a game called Pretva. And this is very quick checker style, where the counters have to jump over each other. And there's one empty circle in the center, which is where the counters have to move. This was our little well for spinning tops. Constant iterations. So we believe in just iterative thinking at the studio, where each project takes multiple forms. And this is a quick glimpse into the carousels that we make. And we've made all kinds of sizes, all kinds of materials of these carousels. Self-sustaining. Over time, we've built a small ecosystem that can think, make, and repair on its own. Most of our hardware, tools, and systems are made in-house with the means we have. This shapes our design language: resourceful, adaptive, self-reliant. Yet the bubble isn't closed. We bring things in, rework them, make them ours. The balance lies in staying self-sufficient without becoming insular, expanding just enough to keep the system alive. To be self-sustaining is not to be isolated, it's to be resilient, to know when something breaks, to know that when something breaks, the solution is already somewhere within the room. And to finish off this presentation, I've put this foosball table that we've created, which is really every single material that we use at the studio, or most materials that we use at the studio, expressed in this. And the base is made in like marble inlay, and all the pieces are made from wood and teak wood and rosewood and brass. And it's this really animated, moving kind of piece of furniture. And we also have a nifty scoring system at either end where each goal is kind of marked with a fallen stick. And that's how you kind of keep score of where each side is in the game. And that is my presentation.
Thank you so much, Priyanka, for the insight into your design practice. And while you stay online, I'd like to invite Ms. Deborah Freeman Fahid back to the stage, and Dr. Anamika Pathak online as well. As we are a little short on time, and thank you all for your patience in staying with us. I think I'm just going to summarize some of the really interesting points that came out of our second panel today. And thank you to all three speakers for bringing in aspects of design evolution, and the cultural contexts that have led to it. So we've looked at, for Indian games and really how they've emerged from their textual sources, what we know, and from the archaeological record, chess and its, myriad evolutions in the Islamic world, and how they also link back to those original roots. And, some of your speculations on what may have caused the shapes to evolve as they did. And that ultimately leads us to, the contemporary expressions that are continuing with practices such as sheds, and how, these kind of materials inform the shape that these pieces take in a way. And I think the one common comment that struck me was, Deborah, your comment on, how maybe the carving became simpler. The evolution may have been prompted by the ease of carving simpler, more abstracted pieces, as opposed to the very ornate miniature sculptures. And that's, I think, something that Priyanka, you also mentioned, in the context of creating your first chess set, that doing those simple designs was also because you didn't know how to sculpt wood. And, there is a resonance in that idea that it's really, something maybe as simple as the idea of not having sophisticated carving technology that could have even led to a design evolution. And I think Dr. Pathak as well, when we're looking at how materials have evolved, and I would draw attention to the Ganjifa cards that were presented towards the end of Dr. Pathak's presentation, where we've moved from, Ganjifa, the Persian card game, to the Indian Mughal version, to materials used even today that are essentially cloth and lacquer. How the materials and the design of all of these pieces, cards, boards, really is a product of their time, a product of the cultural influences, what's available to the craftsperson, and how much effort that they can put in for the market that's available to those games as well. So I think that for this session, really, these are some of the thoughts that I thought tied, all of the presentations together. And I think on that note, I would really like to thank all three of you for your time and for sharing with us your research, your practice, and your insights into the art and design elements of the games from this part of the world as well. And I think, Deborah, if that's anything else that I could invite you to say, since we have you here.
Yes, on that subject, there aren't an enormous number of Islamic games pieces extant. I've seen quite a lot, but it's not as if there are enormous numbers of them. The thing that I find surprising is that actually most of the pieces that have survived are made of really quite expensive materials, particularly ivory. There's an astonishing number made of ivory. Of course, ivory is very durable. It lasts, even in very adverse burial conditions, it will survive like human teeth for hundreds, if not thousands of years.
On the other hand, I think the ceramic chess pieces are incredibly interesting because a ceramic chess set would have been very easy to make, but there's hardly any of them actually. That set is incredibly rare. I know you have featuring a small number in this exhibition also, but it's not the most common material, funnily enough. And I came to the conclusion early on that that period when chess is becoming incredibly popular at a certain level in the 8th, 9th, 10th centuries, it's still an elite pastime. I don't believe it was being played by ordinary people. I just don't see the evidence for that. I may be wrong. It may be the things just haven't survived, but there's very, very few pieces made, for example, of unglazed ceramic, which would have been a very cheap material. They, as I say, they're generally, pretty fancy. So that's just something I find very interesting.
And I also thought, that Dr. Pathak sort of bringing in the evolution of games right to, the British period and the present day as well. There are games like Chopper, for example, that were so popular and have now evolved into Ludo. And in terms of the material as well, do you find that, that change started happening early on? I mean, we see some very elaborate sets of Chopper, but on the day-to-day basis, it was played at home and there were simpler materials as well. Is that that design evolution has almost stalled in a way, with Indian games? Do you find that has, revived in some ways? And I think the question extends to Priyanka as well.
I'll go if Dr. Pathak.
Yeah.
First you?
I didn't get the question right. Can you repeat it?
Sorry, I think I was not very clear. I think I was also just referring to the existence of Indian games, especially I think the example of Chopper, which existed in both, royal sort of expensive materials as well as much simpler ones. Is there, you feel that an evolution has ended there in terms of, what we've seen in past collections? And then, coming to contemporary design for Priyanka, what do you see is happening?
What I have understood that you want to know more about the Chopper, how it is evolved with the snake and ladder, isn't it? Am I right?
No, I'm just referring to the materials that Chopper was made of. The pachisi, rather, if that's easier. Yeah.
Yeah. So, if you look at the historical evidences, so basically it was on the floor. So right from the temples to the religious buildings and the monuments, we found number of graffiti marks which resemble the Chopper, as well as the ladies used to. I have shown in one of the picture that in the villages of Tamil Nadu, still ladies used to just draw the Chopper and they play. But so far as the actual evidence of the Chopper, we come across only in the 16th century with the Chopper game, which is in the Fatehpur Sikri, in the monument, the courtyard of the Fatehpur Sikri, which Akbar has created. And it is believed that he used to play with the live games person. So that kind of there is there. So perhaps that board and the Gyan Chopper, that has been mixed with the this snake and ladder game. So that's my understanding about the snake and ladder.
I'd like to jump on here and just say that I think the way I see it is that the intellectual property of these games has existed, I think, across the board. And I think they have existed in the minds of the people in terms of the intellectual property and the gaming itself. But I think that over time, it has manifested itself in different types of materials, and it has also entered different types of classes, based on how far one can, the affordances of the people in those classes. And I think the surviving pieces are those that have been made with that much glory, I guess, and that really does let them stand the test of time, versus a terracotta is a relatively, I would say that material does get, like, it has a lifespan, which is way shorter than, say, a stone lifespan would be. So and this is what my research also lends to me, is that I think these games are actually way more prolific than we give them credit for. Because the same thing that Dr. Pathak said, I think they existed on like floors of buildings and floors of, say, temples and palaces and things like that, which means that it was there in common memory. But the manifestation of the game in forms of objects is really where you start seeing the material culture of that time. And I think this is exactly what I think that I also observe in contemporary practices, where today the material culture we know has become more and more, I think, cost sensitive, and at one level also disposable, because paper has become probably one of the most paper and cardboard has become one of the most prolifically available materials for games, especially like the mass-produced games and stuff. But the idea of the game exists beyond the materials, and hence there is a freedom to express these games in different materials, as we see and have seen throughout history, as well as how we see it today.
Correct. I agree, Priyanka, that concept was there, but each and every time frame it changes, person to person, region to region. The concept of the game was existed, and everyone has evolved their own game in their own expression.
Thank you for that. And I think that's a wonderful note to end this afternoon's panel on, with the idea that, the idea of the game has always existed. It's the material that has consistently changed over time as well. And it's a continuing evolution, which is what we end our exhibition on as well. So thank you all for your time this afternoon, and thank you to our audience as well. And with that, we will call our second panel to an end. And I'd like to move on to the concluding remarks.
Thank you very much, Malvika, as well. Let's give her a big round of applause. Can we have Malvika and Deborah let's take a photo together with our two speakers as well. So our speakers online, Dr. Pathak and Ms. Shah, please kindly look forward and smile as well. You'll be in the photograph. If you can see yourselves, you'll be on the big screen also. So thank you very much for this wonderful panel. We've gone through chess pieces during the Islamic era. We've understood a bit more about, games and the evolution of games in India, and also creating through play as well. So thank you very much to all our speakers, and a big thank you to our two speakers joining us virtually also. And now, ladies and gentlemen, very quickly, we'll transit over as we round up our symposium here today. So once again, pleased to welcome Nora, the co-curator, to join us.
Okay, I know it's been quite a long day, so if you'll just give me a couple of minutes, I will bring the symposium to a close. As we just finished the second panel, I find myself reflecting on the extraordinary breadth of scholarship and insights into practice that we have traversed today. So we began our journey with Dr. Ulrich Schädler's expansive look at traveling games, which set a perfect stage for understanding how these objects are fluid, migrating across borders, and transforming with every culture they touch. And yet equally interesting are games that do not or could not. And this theme of evolution was echoed throughout with Dr. Colin Mackenzie's investigation into the divinatory roots of Liu Bo, Dr. Jacob Schmidt-Madsen's unpacking of the spiritual dimensions of Chopper and Gian Chopper. And then drawing from our own local context, Mr. Lim Hirokran's meticulous research into Singapore's chess history puts faces, lives, and personalities to the games. And as you've just heard, excellently rounded up by my colleague Malvika, we also delved into the design and artistic excellence evident in these games from the historic to contemporary with Deborah Freeman Fahid, Dr. Malvika Pathak, and Priyanka Shah. As we continue our work at ACM, seeing these diverse threads of research come together reinforces our missions that these games are not just objects in a case, they express human connection and strategic thought across time, space, and cultures. Please join me in giving all our esteemed speakers another round of applause for their insights and generosity of expertise. A day as seamless and intellectually rich as this is the result of immense dedication. I want to extend my deepest thanks to all my colleagues, especially Malvika, Priscilla, Brian, Denise, for your tireless work behind the scenes, to our erstwhile and enthusiastic MC Lester and the team at Purple Forest. Thank you for your professional stewardship of our program. And before we part, I'd like to echo my thanks to our generous supporters for the Let's Play exhibition. We are immensely grateful to Dalio Philanthropies, principal supporters, the Fullerton Heritage Singapore, the Fullerton Hotels and Resorts, Ms. Ida Chow, and Grand Park City Hall for their invaluable contribution. Additionally, among our most ardent supporters are the local and international lenders and partners whose generosity helped us turn the exhibition idea into reality. The Palace Museum Beijing, Chris Hall, Grace Wu, Kansai Kiin, Japan Shogi Association, Japan Creative Center Embassy of Japan, Musée National de Arte Antigua, Lisbon, Embassy of Portugal, Ana and Sir Antonio Horta Osorio, Ava Avery, Nicholas Greenlee, Chen Lian Shan, Patrick Kwok, Bukit Batok Secondary School, CHIJ, St. Teresa's Convent, Indian Heritage Center, National Museum of Singapore, and importantly, our local games association, Singapore Chess Federation, Singapore Xiangqi General Association, and Singapore Weiqi Association. And finally, to our audience, thank you so much for staying with us and for your curiosity and engagement. Let us keep the spirit of inquiry and play alive as we depart. Thank you and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you very much. Let's give Nora a big round of applause. Big hand, Nora, as well as Malvika, co-curators of our exhibition. Let's give them a big round of applause. Come on. Thank you. Well done. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, we'd now like to present tokens of appreciation. Very important, this symposium would not be a success without the contributions of our wonderful speakers. So I'd like to welcome Clement to join us on stage to present to our speakers. Now, firstly, we'd like to also welcome on stage our keynote speaker, Dr. Ulrich Schädler, to please join us on stage. Let's give him a big hand, please. Our keynote speaker joining us. Let's look forward for a photograph smile. Thank you. Dr. Schädler, if you can join me here, please. Dr. Schädler. Thank you. And next, we would like to welcome on stage Dr. Colin Mackenzie. Let's give him a big hand. Welcome, Dr. Mackenzie. Thank you, Dr. Mackenzie. Dr. Mackenzie, you can join me here as well. Dr. Mackenzie, if you can join me here, we'll take a group photo later on. Thank you. Next, we'd like to invite on stage Olimpiu Erkan to join us on stage. Well, thank you very much, Olimpiu. And last but not least, we've got Miss Deborah Freeman Fahid joining us on stage. Just give her a big hand. Thank you to our speakers for joining us here in person. And most importantly as well, for our speakers for joining us online, giving insights from wherever they are. Thank you. Thank you. Hold on, please join us for a group photo. We'd also like to welcome our co-curators to join us for the photograph, Nora and Malvika as well, to join Clement and our wonderful speakers for a group photograph, please. Come, speakers, come, let's step forward. Let's do a photograph together to round up our event here today. Step forward, everyone. Wonderful, thank you. So once again, we have our four speakers here with us. Dr. Ulrich Schädler, Dr. Colin Mackenzie, Olimpiu Erkan, and Ms. Deborah Freeman Fahid, joined by Clement On. We also have Nora and Malvika, co-curators of Let's Play exhibition here as well. How about a fun shot? Thumbs up, everybody. Give me a thumbs up. Thumbs up. Thumbs up, everybody, for a fun shot. Wonderful, thank you. Okay, thank you. Let's give them a big hand, everybody. Thank you very much, Clement. Thank you, Nora and Malvika, for presenting the tokens as well. Now, ladies and gentlemen, before you leave, very important for us to create better events for all of you. There is a QR code on the screen. If you can please give us your feedback, we'll greatly appreciate that. So please scan the QR code and let us know how you feel about our event. If there's anything that we can improve and things that we did well, please do let us know here as well. Now, as you're leaving, reminder, the catalog, if you'd like to purchase it, is available at level 1. Now, the exhibition is open until 7 p.m. So please go ahead. You have free entry with the stickers that all of you have on your chest, if you still have the sticker, the AA sticker. So please enjoy yourselves. Thank you to all of you for joining us for a full day, our symposium today. Let's play the art and design of Asian games. So thank you very much on behalf of the ACM. Wishing all of you a great Saturday ahead. Thank you, and we hope to see all of you next time. Have a good day. Thank you. Bye-bye.